young woman vanished from her own home, while her parents slept just a room away. Detectives couldn't find a single clue, and it seemed like solving this mystery was simply impossible. But eventually, the case took a shocking turn that uncovered the unexpected truth and left the whole country stunned. Alicia Ross was born on February 8, 1980, in Markham, Ontario. When she was just a baby, she was adopted by a couple who surrounded her with love and care. Later, her parents divorced and Alicia stayed with her mom, but she still saw her dad regularly. She loved being outdoors, and her biggest passion was canoeing. She would often head out to Lake Ontario, where she could spend hours paddling across the open water. Eventually, she even started teaching kids how to canoe at local camps. After finishing school, Alicia got a job in sales at HP's Canadian branch, where she quickly proved herself as hardworking and reliable. At the time, she was still living with her mom, who had since remarried. Together with Alicia's stepdad, they converted the basement into a full apartment with its own entrance, so Alicia could stay close to her family while still having her own independence. On August 16, 2005, 25-year-old Alicia went out for an evening walk with her mom and their dogs. Alicia was in great spirits. She had just found out she was getting a promotion the next day. She shared the news with her mom, who wasn't the least bit surprised. Knowing how seriously Alicia took her career, when they got back home, Alicia's boyfriend Sean stopped by to congratulate her. They spent a few hours together, and around midnight he headed home. The next day around noon, Sean called the police to report Alicia missing. He explained that when he got home the night before, he tried calling her, but she didn't answer. He figured she'd already gone to bed and didn't think much of it. But when she didn't pick up the phone the following morning either, he started to worry. Sean drove over to her place and saw that her car was still parked outside. That immediately struck him as odd. Alicia should have been at work hours ago, especially since it was the day she was supposed to get promoted. He knocked on her door, but no one answered. So he walked around to the back of the house and noticed the gate standing wide open. Lying on the grass were Alicia's shoes, an empty cup, and a pack of cigarettes. That was enough to send him into full panic mode, so he decided to call the police right away. After that, Sean called Alicia's mom, and she and her husband rushed back home. By the time they arrived, several police cars were already outside. Officers went through the house, but found no sign of Alicia. There were no obvious signs of a struggle, but detectives noticed something deeply unsettling. It looked like Alicia had never gone to bed the night before. Her bed was neatly made. Freshly washed clothes she had planned to put away were still sitting out. And in the bathroom was her ring, the one she always took off before going to sleep. On top of that, all of her belongings, including her keys and purse, were still on the table. Police quickly confirmed she hadn't shown up for work and officially opened a missing person investigation. Detectives quickly concluded that Alicia hadn't just walked away from home. This looked much more like an abduction. Even though there were no real clues inside the house, her shoes lying by the open gate pointed towards something sinister. And since it looked like Alicia never went to bed that night, investigators believed she may have been taken right after her boyfriend left. Sean got home and called her just 15 minutes later, but by then, she wasn't answering. It seemed as if someone had grabbed her the moment she stepped outside to see him off, right there by that open gate. Alicia's mom hadn't heard anything unusual, and canvassing the neighbors turned up no leads either. With no other direction, police turned their attention to Sean, the most obvious suspect. He was the last person to see her, but detectives struggled to find any motive. The two had only been dating for about a month and a half, and everyone close to Alicia said the relationship was going smoothly. Police searched Sean's car and home, but found nothing suspicious. They also spoke with his neighbors, asking if they had noticed anything odd, like him taking out the trash in the middle of the night. But that led nowhere too. Eventually, detectives started to doubt his involvement. They dug into Alicia's circle of friends and acquaintances, but no one stood out as suspicious. So, detectives launched a massive search operation, setting up a command post inside a local school while the kids were away on summer break. They brought in search dogs, helicopters, and asked the public for help. On the very first day, around 60 people joined in. But by the next day, the number had grown to nearly 400. The response was so overwhelming that police actually had to send some volunteers home because they didn't have enough resources to manage such a huge group. Even so, the search for Alicia quickly became the largest in Ontario's history, and the story spread far beyond Canada's borders. There were a few reasons why the case grabbed so much attention. First, no one could understand how Alicia could vanish from her own backyard in a matter of minutes, with no sounds, no witnesses, and no real clues. And second, from the very beginning, a lot of people pointed the finger at her boyfriend, convinced he had somehow pulled off the perfect crime. One detail that especially fueled suspicion was the fact that Sean called the police almost immediately after Alicia didn't pick up her phone. He had her mother's number, but instead of calling her first to check if she knew where Alicia was, he went straight to the police. About a week and a half after Alicia vanished, the media reported that Sean had refused to take a polygraph test and had stopped cooperating with the police. News that only fueled suspicions against him. Reporters also spoke with him directly, and he admitted that he believed he was now the prime suspect in the case. Meanwhile, the search was going nowhere. Police set up a hotline and got hundreds of calls, but not a single one brought them any closer to finding Alicia. Eventually, detectives had no choice but to call off the search operation and shut down the command post, since the school they were using had to reopen as summer break was ending. A month went by, and investigators still couldn't find a single new lead. They looked into ex-convicts living in the area, interviewed hundreds of Alicia's neighbors, spoke with her co-workers, but every path hit a dead end. At that point, detectives were leaning toward the idea that whoever kidnapped her must have known her personally. That would explain why no one ever heard her scream. That's how things stayed until September 20th, when the case suddenly took a shocking turn. A man walked into the police station with his lawyer and announced that he was the one who had killed Alicia Ross. The man was 31-year-old Daniel Sylvester, Alicia's neighbor, living just a few feet from her house. He said that around 1:30 a.m., he went outside for a walk and stepped into the narrow alleyway between their homes. That's where he ran into Alicia. Seeing him there in the middle of the night startled her, and she asked what he was doing. Daniel told her he had every right to stand outside his own house. An argument broke out, and according to Daniel, when Alicia insulted him, he completely lost control. He punched her, knocking her to the ground, and then kept hitting her as she tried to fight back. Enraged, he slammed her head against the stone walkway several times until she stopped moving. That's when he realized she wasn't breathing and that he had killed her. As he confessed, Daniel even laid down on the floor in front of detectives, physically acting out how he had beaten her to death. Panicking, he froze for a few minutes, not knowing what to do next. Then he made a decision. He had to get rid of the body. He dragged Alicia into his garage, washed the blood off the walkway with a garden hose, and lined the trunk of his mother's car with cardboard. His mom, by the way, was asleep inside the house at the time. He then stripped both himself and Alicia, stuffed the clothes into trash bags, and wrapped her head in rags and duct tape to stop the blood before loading her into the trunk. After that, Daniel went back home, took a shower, and changed into clean clothes. Around 5 a.m., he got into his mother's car and drove about an hour out to a small town called Manila. He found some remote swampy area and dumped Alicia's body, along with the trash bags containing their blood-stained clothes. When he returned home, he suddenly realized that along with his clothes, he had also accidentally thrown out his own wallet with all of his bank cards and driver's license. Over the next few days, Daniel kept going back to the site, desperately trying to find the bag, but he had hidden it so well that he couldn't locate the exact spot again. Still, he remembered exactly where he had left Alicia's body, since he'd stashed it separately. A few weeks later, panic started creeping in. He was terrified the police would eventually find it, so he went back to move the remains. By that point, the body was badly decomposed, and he had to gather the remains by piece. He wrapped them in a tarp, put them in the trunk, and drove about 40 minutes away to a tiny town called Coboconk. There, he found a secluded spot in the woods and hid the body again. Afterward, Daniel confessed that he pleasured himself to ease the tension, but swore he never touched Alicia in a sexual way and that this was never his motive. After finishing his confession, Daniel said he never meant to kill Alicia, but his rage took over and he just couldn't stop himself. One of the detectives told him he should write a letter to Alicia's parents and apologize for what he'd done. Daniel broke down in tears, admitted he had no right to take their daughter away, and scribbled a short apology on a piece of paper. He also said he deeply regretted the pain he had caused his own mother, knowing she would now have to live the rest of her life carrying the shame of his actions. After Daniel's confession, detectives asked him to show them to the spot where he had hidden the body, and sure enough, they found Alicia's remains there. Because of how badly decomposed the body was, experts couldn't determine the exact cause of death, but they did confirm that at least 30 of her bones had been broken. They also discovered that not all of the remains were in that location, suggesting Daniel had left part of them at the first site. Right after that, he was placed under arrest, and the news sent shockwaves through the community. Throughout the entire investigation, Daniel had never once been considered a suspect, even though he lived literally right next door. Soon, more details about him began surfacing in the media. Daniel had no criminal record, but he had struggled with anxiety and depression since childhood. He had a hard time interacting with other people, which made him an easy target for constant bullying. He also struggled with women, so grew up withdrawn and isolated. As an adult, Daniel spent nearly all of his time at home. None of his neighbors really knew him, and even Alicia's mother admitted she had only seen him just a few times over the years, and only in passing. In the end, Daniel was charged with second-degree murder, though his defense pushed for manslaughter, so the case went to trial. The proceedings began in May 2007, almost 2 years after Alicia's death. Prosecutors argued that Daniel had fully intended to kill her and that the original charge should stand. In their view, he could have been watching Alicia for a long time. After all, she lived just a few feet away. They suggested he might have spied on her through her window and that over time, this turned into an unhealthy obsession. That night, when Alicia was standing outside alone, Daniel likely saw an opportunity to approach her, but instead, he frightened her by sneaking up in the dark alleyway. The prosecution emphasized that Daniel had countless chances to stop while he was attacking her, yet he chose not to. Then, instead of calling police, he decided to hide the body, spending the entire night cleaning up and getting rid of evidence. Weeks later, he even went back to move the remains so investigators would have a harder time finding them. Because of all this, the prosecution believed Daniel wasn't motivated by guilt when he confessed, but by fear of being caught. After all, he had tossed out his wallet and ID in the same bag as Alicia's bloody clothing. Sooner or later, someone would have found it and tied him directly to the crime. For that reason, prosecutors insisted he deserved to be convicted of second-degree murder. His lawyer tried to convince the jury that Daniel never meant to kill Alicia, that it all happened in the heat of the moment. According to the defense, Daniel lost control after she insulted him and wasn't thinking clearly about what he was doing. They also pointed to his lifelong struggles, constant bullying that left him with low self-esteem, as well as anxiety and depression that had followed him into adulthood. But then, something came out during the trial that didn't do him any favors. A psychiatrist who had evaluated Daniel before court testified that Daniel had admitted to violent fantasies about women. For example, he imagined jumping out of the bushes and attacking them. And he also confessed that he sometimes exposed himself to strangers on the street. That revelation pushed the jury even further toward believing that Daniel likely had planned to kill Alicia. In the end, he was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 16 years. After the verdict, Daniel tried to appeal his sentence, but nothing came of it. His first chance to apply for parole came in 2021, but there's no record of him being released. Since there's no public information suggesting otherwise, it's most likely that he's still behind bars. It's also worth noting that shortly after Daniel's arrest, a local newspaper issued a public apology to Alicia's boyfriend, Sean. For an entire month, many media outlets had painted him as the prime suspect, and according to Sean's father, that time was devastating for him. Not only had he lost his girlfriend, but countless people believed he was a killer who had gotten away with it. After Daniel was sentenced, Alicia's parents created a memorial fund in her name. It helped sponsor canoe lessons for kids at the national park she loved so much. A young mother finished her evening shift and was on her way home when she suddenly disappeared under strange circumstances. As the police launched their investigation, they quickly uncovered unsettling evidence that led to a shocking truth. This case caught national attention as no one could believe something like this actually happened in real life. Summer Cook was born on December 31st, 1985, in the small town of Logan, Ohio. She grew up in a large family with deeply religious parents. From a young age, Summer and her siblings spent a lot of time at the local church, and their family was well known in the community. She was an outgoing, honest person who had no trouble making friends. Summer got along with everyone and was known for her friendly nature. In school, she stayed busy with ballet, played in the jazz band, and participated in theatrical performances. During her high school years, Summer met a boy named William through their church. They lived on the same street, but before that, they didn't know each other very well. The two started dating, and before long, they decided to get married. Over the next few years, Summer and William had 3 children, 2 daughters and a son. The family settled close to William's parents, who helped out with the kids almost every day. William's father was a pastor and also ran a small construction business. At one point, the entire family decided to move to Florida after he landed a construction contract there. However, things didn't go as planned, and a few years later, they moved back to Logan. In 2010, Summer decided to divorce William. She got custody of the kids and moved back in with her parents. Since her parents lived on the same street, William and his family were still able to see the children regularly. By the spring of 2011, 25-year-old Summer was dedicating nearly all her time to raising her 3 children, who were 5, 3, and 2 years old at the time. Because of this, she couldn't take on a full-time job, so she worked part-time as a cleaner at a local bank, just a few minutes' drive from her home. Despite her busy schedule, Summer had plans for the future. She wanted to enroll in college to get an education and eventually find a better-paying job. Around this time, she also started dating a man named Adam, who worked as a handyman. On the evening of March 22nd, Summer went to her usual night shift at the bank, which was scheduled to end around 11:20 p.m. Before heading home, she sent a few messages to her boyfriend, Adam, but suddenly stopped responding in the middle of their conversation. At first, Adam thought she might just be busy or running late at work. A bit later, he tried calling her, but Summer didn't answer. Growing concerned, Adam decided to walk over to the bank to check if everything was okay. When he arrived, the first thing Adam noticed was that his car, the one Summer had been using to get to work, was still parked outside. Since her shift had ended almost half an hour ago, he started to feel even more concerned. It was unusual because Summer had always left work at the same time without any delays. He went around to the back door of the bank, which she always used during her shifts, and noticed something behind the dumpster. Lying on the ground were her iPod, car keys, and the battery from her phone. This seemed incredibly suspicious, so Adam immediately called her parents. They confirmed that Summer still hadn't returned home and rushed to the bank. After verifying that the items on the ground did belong to her, they immediately called the police. But to their surprise, her parents quickly learned that they weren't the first ones who contacted the authorities. Just half an hour before they called the police, there had been another report. 2 women who were out for an evening jog had run past the bank and witnessed something horrifying. They saw 2 people in black ski masks grab a woman and force her into a car. The woman struggled and tried to fight back, but she couldn't escape. At the same time, another witness was nearby and he attempted to save her. However, as he approached, a woman stepped out of the car and pepper sprayed him. She then got back into the driver's seat and sped off with the kidnappers and their victim. The 2 joggers immediately ran to the police station, which was only a few blocks away, and reported what they had seen. But instead of springing into action, the officers responded with surprising skepticism. They genuinely thought the women had made the whole thing up, despite their pleas to go and find the abducted person. When the witnesses pressed them to go to the bank and investigate, the officers brushed it off, saying most of their staff were busy conducting traffic stops. Eventually, the women walked to one of their houses, got a car, and drove back to the bank about 20 minutes later. To their surprise, There still wasn't a single police officer at the scene, so they just decided to stay and wait. The officers didn't arrive until nearly an hour later, and even then, they showed little urgency, as if nothing serious had happened. When the husband of one of the women started losing his patience and demanded that they do their job, the police responded with hostility and acted aggressively. Eventually, the officers took action. They determined that the woman who had likely been abducted was Summer. Witnesses also provided a description of the vehicle, a white sedan, that the kidnappers had used to flee the scene. The police issued an alert for the car and then went to talk to Summer's relatives to see if they had any idea who might have wanted to hurt their daughter. Summer's parents told investigators that her relationship with her ex-husband William had been rocky for years, even after the divorce. Summer had told them that William's behavior took a drastic turn right after they got married. He saw himself as deeply religious and demanded complete obedience from her. He controlled who she could talk to and spend time with, expected dinner on the table when he got home, and insisted the house be spotless. He even wouldn't let her go to bed without his permission. On top of this, William actually wanted to take a second wife. Although polygamy was illegal, he believed it was acceptable from a religious standpoint and openly shared his plans with Summer. He browsed websites specifically for women interested in such relationships and was actively searching for someone. At the same time, he told Summer she needed to give him 9 more children on top of the 3 they already had. Besides that, William became increasingly aggressive. He wouldn't let Summer leave the house without him, took away her keys and phone, and tried to control her every move. Eventually, she had enough and decided to file for divorce. But William, as well as his parents, were furious about her decision. He tried to gain full custody of their kids and threatened Summer, saying he'd harm her if she took them away from him. Things got even worse when William found out that Summer was seeing someone new. He already knew Adam, and one day he came across a photo on Adam's social media of him with Summer and the kids. That set him off. William started threatening her again and kept fighting for custody in court, but his threats backfired. After hearing about all of this, the judge sided with Summer and gave her full custody of the kids. William's parents weren't ready to let it go either. They tried to discredit Adam by flooding the police with false claims that he was mistreating the kids. Investigators couldn't find any evidence to support these accusations, but William's parents kept pushing, desperate to regain custody of their grandchildren. Digging deeper, the police uncovered something else. About a year earlier, William's father had started his own church and launched a non-profit organization aimed at helping the homeless and those who had lost their homes. His plans sounded noble. He wanted to build affordable housing for these people. To fund the construction, he began selling lottery tickets and managed to raise several $100,000. But there was a catch. No houses were ever built, and none of the people who bought tickets got their money back. To make things even worse, William's father never gave any explanation about what happened to all the money he'd taken. Around the same time, he lost his license as a priest. While the exact reasons weren't made public, it only added to the questions surrounding him. And just months before Summer disappeared, the family faced yet another blow. They lost their home and were evicted. While the family was still living in their old house, Summer went there to collect the rest of her belongings. She brought Adam along to help load everything into her car and also asked the police to send an officer. She was worried about how her ex-husband's family might react, and her concerns turned out to be justified. William's father immediately became aggressive, demanding that Adam stay off his property. Even with a police officer present, he threatened to shoot and beat Adam. When the officer stepped in to calm things down, William's father lost it and even tried to tackle the officer. That didn't end well. He was arrested and later given a suspended sentence. Investigators also uncovered some unsettling details about William's parents. After William was born, his mother couldn't have more children, which was a devastating blow for her. She became so attached to her grandchildren that she treated them like her own kids. In fact, she even told people that if anything ever happened to William and Summer, she'd take full custody of the children. Summer's parents gave investigators her personal journal, and its contents were heartbreaking. She wrote about how William controlled every part of her life and how his behavior had become more and more aggressive. Aggressive, Summer described feeling like a prisoner in her own home, unable to do anything without his approval. The constant pressure weighed heavily on her, and she often felt like she was living in a nightmare, not reality. After gathering all of this information, the police decided to visit William and his parents, who all lived in the same house. They also discovered that the family owned a car matching the model and color described by witnesses of Summer's abduction. Investigators arrived at their home the day after Summer's disappearance. William claimed that he and his parents had been in town that night. According to him, they had driven to Cleveland, about 3 hours away, to look at some houses. He added that their car broke down during the trip, forcing them to spend the entire night there, and his parents backed up his story. William claimed he hadn't seen his ex-wife in days, not since he dropped off the kids. But the police weren't just going to take his word for it. They got a search warrant for his house and car, hoping to find something that would disprove his alibi. During the search, investigators found a GPS navigator for a car inside the family's home. After extracting the data, they noticed something odd. The device had been turned off at 5:30 p.m. on the day of Summer's abduction and wasn't turned back on until 7:30 a.m. the next morning. What was odd, though, was that the last location recorded before it was turned off wasn't Cleveland, where the family said they'd been looking at houses, but Logan. As for the next morning, the GPS showed that the family arrived at a car wash at 7:30 a.m. The police got their hands on the CCTV footage, which showed all three of them carefully cleaning the car, inside and out, and even changing the tires. By the time investigators had pieced everything together, 8 days had already gone by. They kept searching for Summer around the city and the nearby areas, interviewing people and following up on leads, but nothing seemed to bring them any closer to finding her. Once investigators confirmed that William and his parents had lied about their alibi, they brought all three in for questioning. William and his father denied any involvement in Summer's disappearance, so the detectives shifted their focus to his mother. To their surprise, she confessed almost immediately, claiming that Summer was already dead, and began providing details about what had happened. According to her, the family was furious about the court's decision to grant Summer full custody of the children. They had been trying to convince her to let them spend more time with the kids, but after William's threats and his increasingly aggressive behavior, Summer was too scared to leave her children with them for long. So the family came up with a plan. They decided to scare Summer into reconsidering the custody arrangement. Their idea was to abduct and intimidate her, then force her to agree to their terms before letting her go. But things went horribly wrong. After William and his father forced her into the car using a stun gun, William tied her hands with plastic zip ties. Then he took another one and placed it around her neck. When they realized she was struggling to breathe, they tried to remove it, but none of them had a knife to cut it off. As a result, Summer died, and the family knew they had to get rid of her body. They drove to a nearby town where William's parents regularly attended church. Near the church was a large underground septic tank. Thinking it would be the perfect hiding spot, they dumped her body inside and drove away. Although the woman insisted they never planned to kill Summer, her story seemed highly questionable. Given William's repeated death threats and his father's aggressive behavior toward anyone who restricted his access to the grandchildren, investigators suspected that murder might have been their plan from the start. Police went to the church and discovered Summer's body inside the septic tank. Soon after, medical examiners confirmed that the cause of death aligned with the mother's account, and all three family members were arrested and charged with murder. For Summer's family, the entire ordeal was a devastating blow. Not only had her three children lost their mother, but the police's actions, or lack thereof, raised serious questions and outrage. As we know, the police were alerted to the abduction just minutes after it happened, yet they failed to act for over an hour. Medical experts later confirmed that Summer died about 45 minutes after being kidnapped, meaning there was, potentially, enough time to save her. The police could have immediately began looking for the vehicle based on pretty detailed witness descriptions. Considering the abduction happened in the evening in a small town with almost no traffic, investigators might have had a chance to intercept William and his parents. Instead, they justified their delay by saying that most of their officers were tied up with something else. What angered the public even more was that the police station was just a few hundred yards from the bank where the abduction took place. It would have taken just minutes to get there, even on foot. Yet, despite the witnesses, no one came to Summer's aid. Another troubling part of the case was the plea deal offered to William's mother. In exchange for confessing and revealing the location of Summer's body, she got a much lighter sentence. She also testified in court, sticking to her story, and was sentenced to just 15 years in prison. This means she could be out in just a few years. As for William and his father, both were sentenced to life in prison. Since Summer's death, her children have been living with her parents. For the first 6 months after the murder, they struggled with how to break the devastating news to the kids that they would never see their mom or dad again. The children kept asking when they would see their mom, as well as their paternal grandparents. Eventually, Summer's parents realized they couldn't keep the truth hidden forever. With the help of a child psychologist, they gradually explained what had happened. At the time, they feared their oldest son might hear the truth from his classmates, as the story had become well known throughout Logan. In fact, strangers would occasionally approach the children on the street to express their condolences. This even led Summer's parents to consider changing the children's last names to shield them from being forever linked to the tragedy. As of today, Summer's children have grown up and the family stays out of the public eye. As for William's mother, she's set to be released in 2028. It's unclear whether she'll be legally banned from contacting her grandchildren, but given everything we know about this case, it's possible she may try to reconnect with them. Share your thoughts on this story in the comments section and don't forget to press the like button. John Anderson, a well-respected local businessman, was found dead under mysterious circumstances in his home. The news spread like wildfire, leaving the townspeople in shock and disbelief. John's body was discovered by his wife, Lisa Anderson, who called the police in a state of frantic distress. The scene that awaited the detectives was both perplexing and chilling. John lay motionless in the living room, with no visible signs of struggle or forced entry. The initial examination suggested a sudden and unexplained death, but something felt off to the seasoned investigators. Detective Sarah Miller and her partner, Detective James Carter, were assigned to the case. Both experienced and diligent, they knew that in a small town like Brooksville, everyone had their secrets and sometimes those secrets could be deadly. As they began their investigation, the townsfolk watched with bated breath, eager to know what had happened to one of their own. Rumors began to swirl as the community speculated about the cause of John's untimely demise. Some whispered about his business dealings, while others hinted at personal troubles. Little did they know that the truth was far more sinister and tangled than they could ever imagine. As the detectives delved deeper into John's life and relationships, they uncovered a web of deceit, betrayal, and hidden motives that pointed to a shocking conclusion. John Anderson was a man of many facets. At 45, he had built a successful career as the owner of a local hardware store, Anderson's Supplies, which had been a staple in Brooksville for over 2 decades. Known for his generosity and commitment to the community, John was a beloved figure in town. He often donated to local charities and sponsored youth sports teams, earning him a reputation as a pillar of Brooksville society. Despite his public persona, those who knew John well were aware of his private struggles. His marriage to Lisa had been under strain for several years. The couple had met in college and married young, but over time the passion had waned, replaced by routine and occasional arguments. Friends described John as hardworking and dedicated, but also as someone who could be distant and absorbed in his work. John's last known activities painted a picture of a man entrenched in his routine. He had spent the previous day at his store, attending to customers and managing inventory. He left work at his usual time, stopped briefly at a local diner for a cup of coffee, and then headed home. Surveillance footage confirmed that he arrived at his house at 6:45 p.m. That evening, John had planned to spend a quiet night with Lisa, watching television and discussing their upcoming vacation. However, Lisa reported that John had complained of feeling unwell shortly after dinner. He had retired to the living room to rest, and that was the last time she saw him alive. When she went to check on him later, she found him unresponsive and called 911. The initial autopsy report was inconclusive. There were no obvious signs of trauma or foul play, and toxicology results were pending. Detectives Miller and Carter knew that they had to dig deeper into John's life to uncover any potential clues that could explain his sudden death. They began by interviewing Lisa and those closest to John, hoping to piece together the events leading up to that fateful night. Lisa Anderson was the picture of grief when the detectives first interviewed her. At 42, she was a striking woman with auburn hair and piercing blue eyes, now red-rimmed from crying. Her distress seemed genuine, but Miller and Carter knew better than to take things at face value. They needed to understand her relationship with John and her potential role in his death. Lisa worked as a marketing manager for a local real estate firm, a job she had taken up after their two children, Jake and Emily, went off to college. Described by friends as outgoing and charismatic, Lisa was well-liked in the community. However, some noted that her marriage to John had been rocky. There were rumors of arguments and a growing emotional distance between them. When questioned about the night of John's death, Lisa recounted her version of events with a tremor in her voice. She described how John had complained of feeling ill after dinner and had decided to lie down in the living room. She had given him some space, thinking he needed rest, and had gone upstairs to read. Hours later, when she didn't hear from him, she went downstairs and found him unresponsive. Lisa's reaction to John's death was complex. She expressed deep sorrow and a sense of loss, but also hinted at frustrations that had simmered beneath the surface of their marriage. She admitted that they had been going through a rough patch, but she insisted that she loved John and had hoped to work through their issues. As the detectives delved deeper, they noticed subtle inconsistencies in Lisa's statements. She seemed hesitant when discussing certain aspects of her relationship with John, and there were moments when her grief appeared almost performative. Miller and Carter decided to explore further, focusing on Lisa's personal life and relationships outside her marriage. Their investigation soon led them to Mark Benson, Lisa's co-worker. Initial inquiries revealed that Lisa and Mark had been spending a lot of time together, both in and out of the office. The nature of their relationship raised eyebrows, and the detectives suspected that there was more to the story than Lisa had let on. With this new lead, they began to unravel the threads of an affair that would cast a dark shadow over John's death and point to possible motives that were previously unseen. Detectives Miller and Carter arrived at the Anderson residence the morning after John's body was discovered. The house, a modest two-story home on Maple Street, was cordoned off with police tape. Forensic teams were already at work, meticulously combing through every inch of the property for clues. Miller, a seasoned detective with a keen eye for detail, started her examination in the living room where John's body had been found. The room was neat, almost eerily so. John lay on the couch, his face serene as if he were merely asleep. There were no signs of a struggle, no obvious wounds or marks on his body. The initial assessment by the medical examiner suggested that John had died of unknown causes. Pending a full autopsy, Carter Miller's partner was outside speaking with the first responders, a burly man with a no-nonsense attitude. He had a knack for getting people to talk. He gathered statements from the paramedics and the patrol officers who had first arrived at the scene. Some of them had seen anything out of the ordinary, and there were no immediate signs of forced entry or foul play. Inside, Miller turned her attention to Lisa, who sat at the kitchen table clutching a tissue. Lisa's hands trembled as she recounted the events of the previous night. Her story was consistent with what she had told the 911 operator. John had felt unwell, and she had left him to rest, only to find him unresponsive later. Miller noted the way Lisa's eyes darted around the room, avoiding direct contact. As they wrapped up their initial interviews, Miller and Carter spoke with several neighbors. Most described the Andersons as a quiet couple who kept to themselves. A few mentioned hearing arguments on occasion, but nothing that had raised significant alarm. One neighbor, Mrs. Evans, an elderly widow who lived next door, recalled seeing John the evening before. He had seemed his usual self, waving as he walked to his front door. Back at the station, the detectives reviewed their notes. They compiled a list of potential witnesses and persons of interest, starting with Lisa and expanding to friends, family, and coworkers. The preliminary evidence didn't point clearly in any direction, but Miller and Carter were determined to leave no stone unturned. Forensic analysis began to yield some results. The autopsy confirmed that John had not suffered from any external injuries. Toxicology tests, however, revealed trace amounts of a foreign substance in his system. This finding raised new questions about whether John's death was natural, or if he had been deliberately poisoned. The detectives considered the possibility of an accidental overdose, but decided to focus on investigating any potential foul play. Meanwhile, Miller and Carter continued to scrutinize Lisa's behavior and background. They requested her phone records and financial statements, looking for any anomalies. Lisa's initial shock and sorrow seemed genuine, but the detectives knew that grief could mask many things. They needed to understand her motives, her relationships, and her state of mind in the weeks leading up to John's death. Their investigation soon took a critical turn when they discovered a series of text messages between Lisa and her coworker, Mark Benson. The messages hinted at a relationship that was far more intimate than just colleagues. This revelation provided a new perspective on the case and prompted the detectives to delve deeper into Lisa's affair with Mark, exploring how it might connect to John's untimely demise. The discovery of Lisa's affair with Mark Benson was a turning point in the investigation. The text messages between them were explicit and left little doubt about the nature of their relationship. Mark, a suave and charming man in his early 40s, worked with Lisa at the real estate firm, and it was clear that their connection went beyond professional boundaries. Detectives Miller and Carter decided to bring Lisa in for a second round of questioning. This time, they confronted her with the evidence of her affair. Lisa initially denied any wrongdoing, but when presented with the text messages, she broke down. Through tears, she admitted to the affair, claiming that it had started several months earlier. She insisted, however, that it had nothing to do with John's death. Lisa explained that she had felt lonely and unappreciated in her marriage. John had become increasingly distant, more focused on his business than on their relationship. She sought comfort and companionship in Mark, who was attentive and understanding. The affair had been an escape, a way for her to feel alive again, but she maintained that she had never wanted any harm to come to John. Miller and Carter knew that affairs could be powerful motivators for murder, but they needed more concrete evidence to link Lisa or Mark to John's death. They decided to bring Mark in for questioning. Mark was cooperative but nervous. He confirmed the affair, describing it as a whirlwind romance that had provided solace to both him and Lisa. He claimed that he had no knowledge of John's death and had been at home on the night it happened, a fact that they would need to verify. As the detectives delved deeper into the affair, they discovered that Lisa and Mark had been planning to start a new life together. Emails and further text messages revealed discussions about leaving Brooksville and moving to a different city. They had even looked into potential properties and job opportunities elsewhere. This painted a picture of a couple desperate to escape their current lives, raising further suspicions about their involvement in John's death. The affair added a layer of complexity to the case. Lisa's motives seemed clear. If she were free from her marriage, she could be with Mark without the stigma of divorce in their conservative community. However, Miller and Carter needed to establish a link between the affair and John's death. They began by re-examining the toxicology report, looking for any substances that could be traced back to Lisa or Mark. The detectives also started to scrutinize Mark's background more closely. They discovered that he had a history of financial troubles and had recently been involved in a legal dispute with a former employer. This revelation suggested that Mark might have had his own motives for wanting John out of the picture, particularly if he believed that Lisa could provide financial stability. With these new leads, Miller and Carter were determined to uncover the truth. They needed to build a case that connected the dots between the affair, the motives, and the opportunity for either Lisa or Mark to have orchestrated John's death. The stakes were high, and the pressure was mounting. But the detectives were resolute in their pursuit of justice. Mark Benson presented himself as a confident and composed individual, But under the scrutiny of the detectives, cracks began to appear in his facade. Mark was a real estate agent who had joined the same firm as Lisa a year prior. At 41, he was known for his charm and persuasive skills, which had earned him a reputation as one of the top agents in Brooksville. However, his personal life was far less stable. During his interview, Mark maintained that his relationship with Lisa was purely about mutual emotional support. He admitted to falling in love with her, but insisted that they had no plans to harm John. He claimed to have been at his apartment on the night of John's death, providing an alibi that the detectives would need to verify. As Miller and Carter dug into Mark's background, they found several red flags. Mark had moved to Brooksville after a series of failed business ventures in larger cities. He had accumulated significant debt and had been sued by a former business partner over a failed investment. Financial records showed that Mark was living beyond his means, struggling to keep up with his debts and maintain his lifestyle. Further investigation into Mark's phone records and emails revealed frequent, secretive communications with Lisa. They often discussed their dissatisfaction with their current lives and fantasized about a future together. In one particularly revealing email, Mark wrote about his desperation to start anew, and his frustration with the obstacles in their way. While this was not direct evidence of a murder plot, it added to the narrative that he had a strong motive to eliminate John. The detectives also uncovered that Mark had recently taken out a sizable life insurance policy on himself, naming Lisa as the beneficiary. This discovery was particularly suspicious, suggesting that Mark might have been planning for a future that included financial security, possibly derived from Lisa's newfound widowhood. To verify Mark's alibi, Miller and Carter visited his apartment complex. The building manager confirmed that Mark had been seen entering his apartment around 7 p.m. on the night of John's death, but there were no witnesses to confirm his presence there for the entire evening. This left a window of opportunity that the detectives couldn't ignore. As they continued to interrogate Mark, his story began to show inconsistencies. He stumbled over details about his whereabouts and interactions with Lisa. Miller and Carter pressed harder, using psychological tactics to unsettle him. Mark's composure started to fray and he became increasingly defensive. In a tense moment during questioning, Mark blurted out that Lisa had been the one to suggest they could be together sooner if John were out of the picture. This accusation shifted the focus back to Lisa and raised questions about who was truly orchestrating the events leading up to John's death. Was Mark trying to deflect blame, or was there a more sinister conspiracy at play? With both Lisa and Mark under intense scrutiny, the detectives faced the challenge of untangling a web of lies, motives, and opportunities. They needed more concrete evidence to determine whether one or both of them were responsible for John's death. As they continued their investigation, they hoped that the next piece of the puzzle would bring them closer to the truth. As the investigation progressed, Miller and Carter encountered numerous twists and turns that complicated the case. New evidence surfaced, leading them down unexpected paths and challenging their initial assumptions. Each revelation brought them closer to the truth, but also raised more questions. One such twist came when the toxicology report was finalized. The foreign substance found in John's system was identified as a rare, fast-acting poison. This poison was not something one could easily acquire, pointing to a premeditated act rather than an accidental overdose. The detectives now had concrete evidence that John's death was a murder, and they needed to find out who had access to such a substance. Their inquiries led them to a local pharmacy where the poison had been purchased. The pharmacist remembered selling the substance to a man matching Mark's description, but there was no solid proof linking Mark directly to the purchase. This added another layer of suspicion, but was not enough to make an arrest. While following up on the lead at the pharmacy, the detectives received an anonymous tip. The caller claimed to have seen Lisa meeting with a man in a secluded park shortly before John's death. This information suggested that Lisa might have been plotting something clandestine, possibly involving Mark. The detectives traced the call but found that it originated from a disposable phone, making it impossible to identify the source. Simultaneously, a surprising piece of evidence emerged from John's business dealings. Financial records indicated that John had recently transferred a significant sum of money to an unknown account. Further investigation revealed that this account belonged to a private investigator named Alex Thompson. When questioned, Thompson disclosed that John had hired him to follow Lisa, suspecting her of infidelity. This revelation painted a picture of a man who was not only aware of his wife's affair, but also taking steps to gather evidence. The private investigator's report included photos and detailed logs of Lisa's meetings with Mark. These documents confirmed the affair, but also contained troubling information about Lisa's behavior. According to Thompson, Lisa had been acting erratically in recent weeks, frequently discussing her unhappiness and expressing anger towards John. In one recorded conversation, she mentioned feeling trapped and hinted at wanting to escape her marriage by any means necessary. This new evidence prompted Miller and Carter to reevaluate their approach. They decided to conduct a thorough search of the Anderson home, hoping to find something that might link Lisa or Mark directly to the murder. During the search, they discovered a hidden compartment in Lisa's closet, containing vials of the same rare poison found in John's system. This discovery was damning and suggested Lisa's direct involvement in the crime. Confronted with this evidence, Lisa's demeanor shifted. She became defensive and hostile, accusing the detectives of trying to frame her. She insisted that she had no knowledge of the poison and that someone must have planted it to incriminate her. However, just as the detectives felt they were closing in on a resolution, another twist emerged. Mark Benson came forward with new information, claiming that Lisa had manipulated him into helping her acquire the poison. He provided emails and messages in which Lisa discussed her plan to poison John, making it appear as though Mark was a reluctant accomplice rather than the mastermind. With conflicting stories from Lisa and Mark, Miller and Carter faced a complex challenge. They needed to determine who was telling the truth and who was orchestrating a cover-up. The investigation had revealed a tangled web of deceit, motives, and opportunities, but the exact sequence of events leading to John's death remained elusive. Conversely, Mark's narrative painted him as a pawn in Lisa's scheme. He described how Lisa had gradually introduced the idea of poisoning John, making it seem like a desperate measure to free herself from an unbearable situation. He admitted to helping her obtain the poison, but insisted that he had never intended for John to die. His portrayal of Lisa as the mastermind added another layer of complexity to the case. To uncover the truth, the detectives decided to conduct a final round of intense interrogations. They hoped to catch one or both suspects in a lie or reveal inconsistencies that could break the case wide open. Miller and Carter knew that the key to solving the murder lay in understanding the true nature of the relationship between Lisa and Mark and the depth of their motives. In a tense interview, Lisa finally broke down. She admitted that she had felt trapped in her marriage and saw no way out other than eliminating John. However, she insisted that Mark had been an active participant, encouraging her to go through with the plan. Her confession provided crucial insight into her state of mind and her willingness to commit murder to achieve her goals. With this new information, the detectives turned their attention back to Mark. They confronted him with Lisa's confession, hoping to provoke a reaction. Mark, realizing that his attempts to deflect blame were failing, began to unravel. He confessed to helping Lisa, but maintained that she had manipulated him from the start. The confessions from both suspects provided a clearer picture of the motives and events leading up to John's death. The detectives now had to piece together the final puzzle and determine how to proceed with arrests and charges, ensuring that justice would be served. The breakthrough in the case came when the detectives re-examined the timeline and physical evidence one last time. They discovered a crucial piece of evidence that had initially been overlooked: a security camera from a neighbor's house that captured a portion of the Andersons' backyard. The footage revealed Mark entering the Anderson home on the night of John's death, contradicting his alibi and providing a direct link between him and the crime scene. The jury deliberated for several days before returning a guilty verdict for both Lisa and Mark. Lisa was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, while Mark received a slightly lesser sentence due to his perceived secondary role in the crime. The community of Brooksville was left to grapple with the aftermath of the tragedy, but there was a sense of closure as justice had been served. The quiet town of Greenfield was shaken to its core when the body of Jack Thompson was discovered in his modest home on the outskirts of town. Jack, a well-liked middle-aged man known for his generosity and calm demeanor, had recently gone through a tumultuous divorce from his wife, Layla. The divorce, finalized just months prior, had left Jack visibly strained, but no one could have anticipated the tragic end he would meet. Layla Thompson, once the high school sweetheart and longtime partner of Jack, had quickly moved on after their split. She found solace in Derek Stone, a charismatic yet troubled man with a shadowy past. Derek, a former convict with a history of violent offenses, had swept Layla off her feet, bringing a sense of danger and excitement into her life that she had never experienced before. The discovery of Jack's lifeless body under suspicious circumstances set off a whirlwind investigation that uncovered a tangled web of deceit, betrayal, and revenge. The love triangle between Jack and Layla and Derek became the focal point of the investigation, revealing dark secrets and motives that lay hidden beneath the surface. Greenfield's local police force, led by Detective Sarah Lawson, was tasked with untangling the complex relationships and finding the truth behind Jack's untimely death. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that this was not just a simple case of a crime of passion, but a meticulously planned act of vengeance. In the weeks that followed, the town would witness shocking revelations and unexpected twists as the true nature of the relationships between Jack, Layla, and Derek came to light. The line between victim and perpetrator blurred, leaving everyone to wonder who could be trusted and who was hiding the darkest secrets. Jack and Layla Thompson's marriage had once been the epitome of stability and love. They had met in high school, their romance blossoming over the years into a marriage that seemed unbreakable. Jack, a kind-hearted man with a steady job as a schoolteacher, had always been the rock in their relationship. Layla, a nurse at the local hospital, complemented his steadiness with her nurturing and compassionate nature. However, as the years passed, the spark in their relationship began to fade. The stresses of daily life, combined with their inability to have children, placed a strain on their marriage. Layla's desire for excitement and change grew, leading her to seek solace outside their relationship. This quest for something new ultimately led her to Derek Stone. Derek Stone was a man with a troubled past. He had spent several years in prison for armed robbery and assault, but upon his release, he had vowed to turn his life around. His rugged good looks and charm quickly won Layla over, offering her the thrill and unpredictability she craved. Derek's presence in her life provided a stark contrast to the stability she had known with Jack. The affair between Layla and Derek was passionate and intense, leading to the eventual breakdown of her marriage to Jack. The divorce was bitter, with accusations and recriminations flying from both sides. Jack was devastated, unable to comprehend how the woman he had loved for so long could betray him in such a manner. Layla, on the other hand, felt liberated, ready to start a new chapter with Derek. Despite his attempts to move on, Jack found it difficult to let go of the past. He remained deeply in love with Layla, his heart aching at the thought of her with another man. His friends and colleagues noticed the change in him, his once cheerful demeanor replaced by a quiet sadness. Jack's attempts to rekindle his relationship with Layla were met with hostility, further deepening his despair. Derek, meanwhile, harbored his own grudges. He resented Jack for the hold he still seemed to have over Layla, and his violent tendencies began to resurface. Derek's jealousy and possessiveness became more pronounced, leading to frequent arguments with Layla. Despite this, Layla remained committed to Derek, convinced that their love was worth the turmoil. As the months passed, the tension between Jack, Layla, and Derek grew, setting the stage for the tragic events that were about to unfold. The love triangle fraught with jealousy and resentment would soon explode in a manner that would shock the entire town of Greenfield and leave a trail of devastation in its wake. The crisp autumn morning was shattered by the piercing scream of Mrs. Henderson, Jack's elderly neighbor, as she discovered his lifeless body sprawled across the living room floor. She had come over to check on Jack after noticing that his mail had piled up over the past few days. Her concern quickly turned to horror as she stumbled upon the gruesome scene. The local police were called immediately, And within minutes Detective Sarah Lawson and her team arrived at the scene. The sight that greeted them was both disturbing and puzzling. Jack's body lay in a pool of blood, his face contorted in a grimace of pain. There were signs of a violent struggle, with furniture overturned and broken glass scattered across the floor. As the forensic team began their meticulous work, Detective Lawson interviewed Mrs. Henderson. The elderly woman, still visibly shaken, recounted her discovery and her interactions with Jack in the days leading up to his death. She mentioned hearing raised voices coming from Jack's house a few nights before, but she had assumed it was just another argument between him and Layla. Layla and Derek were quickly brought in for questioning. Layla appeared distraught, her eyes red from crying. Derek, on the other hand, was stoic, his expression unreadable. Detective Lawson noted the stark contrast between the two, her instincts telling her that there was more to their story than met the eye. Layla recounted her last interaction with Jack. She claimed that she had not seen him for several days, and that their last conversation had been about finalizing the sale of their former home. Derek corroborated Layla's account, stating that they had spent the night of Jack's death at his apartment, miles away from the crime scene. Despite their alibis, Detective Lawson couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She ordered a thorough search of Derek's apartment and began to dig deeper into his past. The initial results of the forensic analysis pointed towards a struggle. With Jack having put up a significant fight against his attacker, there were signs of blunt force trauma to his head, suggesting that he had been struck multiple times with a heavy object. The discovery of a bloodied baseball bat in Jack's garage further complicated the investigation. The bat had Jack's fingerprints on it, but there were also smudges that suggested someone else had handled it. Detective Lawson sent the bat to the lab for further analysis, hoping it would provide a crucial lead. The townspeople of Greenfield were abuzz with speculation. Theories ranged from a robbery gone wrong to a crime of passion. Jack's friends and colleagues were interviewed, painting a picture of a man who was deeply troubled, but not without enemies. Layla and Derek's tumultuous relationship became a focal point of the investigation, with many suspecting that their involvement went beyond just an affair. Detective Lawson knew that unraveling the truth behind Jack's death would require piecing together the fragmented lives of the people involved. The love triangle between Jack, Layla, and Derek was fraught with complexities, and she was determined to uncover every hidden detail, no matter how dark or disturbing. The investigation into Jack Thompson's murder began in earnest, with Detective Sarah Lawson leading the charge. Her first step was to establish a timeline of events leading up to Jack's death. She and her team interviewed neighbors, friends, and family, piecing together the last known movements of Jack, Layla, and Derek. The neighbors provided a wealth of information. Several had heard loud arguments coming from Jack's house in the days before his death. One neighbor, Mr. Parker, reported seeing a shadowy figure lurking around Jack's property late at night, although he couldn't provide a clear description. Another neighbor, Mrs. Green, mentioned seeing Layla leave Jack's house in a hurry the day before his body was found. Detective Lawson interviewed Layla's colleagues at the hospital, who described her as a dedicated nurse, but noted that she had become increasingly distracted and agitated in recent months. One colleague, Susan, recalled Layla confiding in her about the stress of her divorce and her volatile relationship with Derek. Susan mentioned that Layla had expressed fear for her safety on several occasions, hinting at Derek's violent tendencies. The investigation also delved into Derek's background. Detective Lawson discovered that Derek had a history of violence and had been in and out of prison for various offenses, including assault and armed robbery. She interviewed some of Derek's former associates, who painted a picture of a man prone to explosive outbursts and a deep-seated need for control. One former associate, Mike, mentioned that Derek had often talked about exacting revenge on anyone who wronged him. Despite Derek's troubling past, his alibi for the night of Jack's murder seemed solid. However, Detective Lawson couldn't ignore the mounting evidence that suggested he had a motive for wanting Jack out of the picture. The discovery of Jack's blood on Derek's shoes, found during the search of his apartment, further fueled her suspicions. Layla's inconsistent statements also raised red flags. During her initial interview, she had claimed not to have seen Jack for days. However, Mrs. Green's account contradicted this, placing Layla at Jack's house the day before his death. When confronted with this discrepancy, Layla became defensive, insisting that she had only gone to collect some personal belongings and had left after a brief argument. As the investigation progressed, Detective Lawson uncovered a series of text messages between Layla and Derek that suggested they had discussed plans to confront Jack about his continued interference in their relationship. The messages hinted at a growing frustration with Jack and a desire to put an end to the constant conflict. Despite the mounting evidence, the case was far from straightforward. Knew that she needed more concrete proof to build a solid case against Derek and Layla. She ordered a thorough analysis of the crime scene, hoping to find forensic evidence that would link them directly to Jack's murder. The community of Greenfield watched anxiously as the investigation unfolded. The once quiet town was now the center of a media frenzy, with reporters flocking to cover the sensational story. The pressure on Detective Lawson and her team was immense, but she remained steadfast in her determination to uncover the truth and bring justice to Jack Thompson. As the investigation into Jack Thompson's murder deepened, suspicions surrounding Layla and Derek grew more pronounced. Detective Lawson and her team scrutinized every detail, piecing together the puzzle that seemed to implicate both Layla and Derek in Jack's death. Layla's behavior became increasingly erratic. Her initial grief gave way to a defensive and hostile attitude during subsequent interviews. When questioned about her presence at Jack's house, she provided conflicting accounts, further muddying the waters. Her colleagues at the hospital noted her frequent absences and whispered conversations on her phone, fueling speculation about her involvement in something sinister. Detective Lawson also focused on Derek's suspicious behavior. Despite his alibi, there were inconsistencies that couldn't be ignored. Derek had claimed to be at his apartment on the night of the murder, but surveillance footage from a nearby gas station showed his car on the road during the time frame in question. The footage, though grainy, provided enough evidence to warrant further investigation. The discovery of Jack's blood on Derek's shoes was a significant breakthrough. Forensic analysis confirmed that the blood matched Jack's, placing Derek at the crime scene. When confronted with this evidence, Derek's composure cracked. He denied any involvement, claiming that he had been framed, but his increasingly erratic behavior only deepened Detective Lawson's suspicions. Layla's phone records revealed a series of heated exchanges between her and Derek. In the days leading up to Jack's murder, the messages hinted at a plan to confront Jack and put an end to the constant turmoil he was causing in their lives. The tone of the messages grew more aggressive, with Derek urging Layla to take decisive action. One particular message stood out. Derek had texted Layla the night before the murder, saying, "It's time we take care of this once and for all." Layla's response was cryptic, but seemed to indicate her agreement. The messages provided a chilling glimpse into the escalating tension between the three individuals. Detective Lawson's team also uncovered financial records that revealed Layla had recently taken out a substantial life insurance policy on Jack. The policy, worth a significant amount, named Layla as the sole beneficiary. The timing of the policy raised eyebrows, suggesting a possible financial motive for Jack's murder. As the evidence mounted, Detective Lawson knew she needed a confession to solidify the case. She decided to apply pressure on Layla, hoping to exploit the cracks in her story. During a tense interrogation, Layla finally broke down. She admitted to visiting Jack's house the day before his death, but insisted that she had left before anything happened. She claimed that Derek had become increasingly unhinged, pressuring her to cut all ties with Jack. Detective Lawson also interviewed Derek's former associates again, this time focusing on his violent tendencies and potential motive. Mike, the former associate who had mentioned Derek's penchant for revenge, revealed that Derek had often spoken about wanting to eliminate anyone who threatened his relationship with Layla. Despite the mounting evidence against Derek, the investigation faced a critical juncture. Detective Lawson needed concrete proof to link Derek directly to the crime. She ordered a comprehensive search of Derek's apartment, hoping to uncover the final piece of the puzzle that would bring justice to Jack Thompson. As the investigation into Jack Thompson's murder continued, Detective Sarah Lawson delved deeper into Derek Stone's past. The more she uncovered, the more it became clear that Derek was a man with a history of violence and a potential for revenge. Derek's criminal record revealed a series of offenses dating back to his teenage years. He had been involved in gang activities, petty thefts, and assaults. His most serious conviction, however, was for armed robbery, which had landed him in prison for several years. During his incarceration, Derek had been involved in multiple altercations with other inmates, further highlighting his violent tendencies. Detective Lawson interviewed some of Derek's former associates, hoping to gain insight into his behavior and motives. Mike, the associate who had previously hinted at Derek's vengeful nature, provided a chilling account of Derek's time in prison. According to Mike, Derek had developed a reputation for being ruthless and unforgiving, often targeting those who crossed him or posed a threat. One former associate, Steve, recounted a particularly disturbing incident. Derek had been involved in a violent altercation with another inmate who had insulted him. The fight had left the inmate severely injured, and Derek had shown no remorse. Steve described Derek as a man who thrived on control and power, traits that had only intensified during his time behind bars. Detective Lawson also discovered that Derek had a history of unstable relationships. His ex-girlfriend, Lisa, came forward with her own harrowing account of their time together. Lisa described Derek as charming and attentive at first, but his demeanor quickly changed. He became possessive and abusive, isolating her from friends and family. She eventually managed to escape the relationship but remained fearful of Derek's potential for violence. Lisa's account provided further insight into Derek's character. She mentioned that Derek had often spoken about his desire for revenge against anyone who wronged him. He harbored deep-seated grudges and was willing to go to great lengths to settle scores. Detective Lawson realized that Derek's relationship with Layla and his resentment towards Jack fit this pattern perfectly. Armed with this new information, Detective Lawson intensified her efforts to find concrete evidence linking Derek to Jack's murder. She ordered a comprehensive search of Derek's apartment, hoping to uncover any items that could connect him to the crime scene. The search yielded several pieces of potential evidence, including a set of keys that matched the locks on Jack's house and a blood-stained shirt hidden in the back of Derek's closet. Forensic analysis confirmed that the blood on the shirt matched Jack's, providing a direct link between Derek and the crime. This discovery was a significant breakthrough, but Detective Lawson knew that it was not enough on its own to secure a conviction. She needed a confession or additional evidence to solidify the case. Detective Lawson decided to confront Derek with the new evidence, hoping to elicit a reaction. During the interrogation, Derek's composure began to crack. He vehemently denied any involvement, but his increasingly erratic behavior suggested otherwise. Layla, who had been brought in for questioning once again, appeared visibly shaken when confronted with the evidence against Derek. In a desperate bid to save herself, Layla began to distance herself from Derek. She claimed that he had manipulated her and that she had been too afraid to leave him. Layla's statements, while self-serving, provided further insight into the toxic and volatile nature of their relationship. Detective Lawson knew she was close to unraveling the truth, but she needed one final push to bring the case to its conclusion. As the investigation reached its critical juncture, new evidence and unexpected revelations added further complexity to the case. Detective Sarah Lawson and her team were determined to untangle the web of deceit that surrounded Jack Thompson's murder. One of the most significant breakthroughs came from an unexpected source. A former inmate who had shared a cell with Derek, named Tony, came forward with crucial information. Tony revealed that Derek had confided in him about his plan to get rid of Jack. According to Tony, Derek had expressed his frustration with Jack's continued presence in Layla's life and had boasted about his intention to eliminate the problem once and for all. Tony's account added weight to the theory that Derek had premeditated the murder. He provided specific details that matched the evidence found at the crime scene, including the use of the baseball bat as the murder weapon. Tony's testimony was a game-changer, providing the corroboration Detective Lawson needed to build a solid case against Derek. However, the investigation took an unexpected turn when Layla's secret was uncovered. Detective Lawson's team discovered a series of hidden bank accounts in Layla's name, containing large sums of money that she had been siphoning off over the past few years. This revelation raised questions about Layla's true motives and her potential involvement in the murder. Layla's financial records revealed that she had been planning to leave Derek and start a new life. She had been saving money in secret, waiting for the right moment to make her escape. This newfound information painted a different picture of Layla, suggesting that she might have had her own reasons for wanting Jack out of the way. Detective Lawson confronted Layla with the evidence of the hidden bank accounts. Layla broke down, admitting that she had been trapped in a toxic and abusive relationship with Derek. She confessed that she had feared for her life and had been planning to escape, but insisted that she had no involvement in Jack's murder. Layla claimed that Derek had acted alone, driven by his own jealous rage. As the investigation unfolded, another twist emerged. A third party, previously unknown to the investigators, was discovered to have had contact with both Layla and Derek. This individual named Ryan was a former colleague of Derek's from his criminal days. Ryan had recently been released from prison and had reconnected with Derek. Detective Lawson brought Ryan in for questioning, hoping to uncover his role in the case. Ryan admitted to meeting with Derek and Layla on several occasions, but denied any involvement in the murder. However, his statements were inconsistent, and his nervous demeanor suggested that he was hiding something. The investigation took a dramatic turn when Ryan's fingerprints were found on the baseball bat used to kill Jack. Under intense interrogation, Ryan finally cracked. He confessed that Derek had enlisted his help in carrying out the murder, promising him a share of the life insurance money that Layla had taken out on Jack. Ryan revealed that Derek had planned every detail, from the initial confrontation to the disposal of evidence. Ryan's confession provided the missing piece of the puzzle, implicating both Derek and himself in the murder. Layla's role remained murky, but the evidence suggested that she had been a pawn in Derek's twisted game. Detective Lawson knew that the case was far from straightforward, but she was determined to bring those responsible to justice. With Ryan's confession in hand, Detective Sarah Lawson prepared for the final confrontation. She knew that Derek Stone would not go down without a fight, and she braced herself for a tense and potentially dangerous encounter. Detective Lawson and her team planned a coordinated effort to arrest Derek. They decided to approach him at his apartment, where he had been staying with Layla. The element of surprise was crucial, as they anticipated that Derek might attempt to flee or react violently. On the day of the operation, the team moved swiftly and efficiently. Detective Lawson knocked on Derek's door, her heart pounding with anticipation. Derek answered, his expression a mix of surprise and defiance. Detective Lawson presented the evidence and Ryan's confession, informing Derek that he was under arrest for the murder of Jack Thompson. Derek's reaction was immediate and explosive. He lunged at Detective Lawson, shouting accusations and threats. The officers quickly subdued him, but not before Derek managed to land a few blows. His resistance only served to reinforce the image of a violent and unstable individual, further sealing his fate. As Derek was taken into custody, Layla was brought in for questioning once again. The revelation of Ryan's involvement had shaken her, and she seemed genuinely terrified of Derek. Layla insisted that she had been unaware of the full extent of Derek's plan, and that she had never intended for Jack to be harmed. Despite Layla's claims, the evidence suggested that she had at least some knowledge of Derek's intentions. Detective Lawson pressed her for details, hoping to unravel the final threads of the case. Under intense questioning, Layla admitted that she had suspected Derek was planning something, but had been too afraid to confront him. The climax of the investigation came when Derek, now facing the reality of his situation, decided to cut a deal. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he agreed to provide a full confession and implicate Layla in the planning of the murder. Derek's confession was chilling, detailing the calculated and cold-blooded manner in which he had orchestrated Jack's death. Derek revealed that he had manipulated Layla into taking out the life insurance policy on Jack, promising her a future free from financial worries. He had then enlisted Ryan's help, using his former associate's desperation and loyalty to carry out the crime. Derek admitted that he had been driven by jealousy and a desire for control. Unable to tolerate Jack's continued presence in Layla's life, Layla, confronted with Derek's confession, broke down completely. She admitted to her role in the plan, though she maintained that she had never intended for Jack to be killed. Her fear of Derek and her desire for freedom had clouded her judgment, leading her down a dark and tragic path. With both Derek and Layla in custody, the case against them was solid. The legal proceedings moved swiftly, with Derek receiving a life sentence for his role as the mastermind behind the murder. Layla, though complicit, received a lesser sentence due to her cooperation and the evidence of her abusive relationship with Derek. The town of Greenfield, though forever changed by the events, found a renewed sense of unity and resilience. The legacy of Jack Thompson lived on, a reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of seeking justice for those who could no longer speak for themselves. A young woman went to a party with her friends and vanished without a trace. Police launched a search, but they couldn't find her. From the very beginning, there were plenty of suspicious leads and potential suspects, but the truth kept slipping through their fingers. The case dragged on for 30 years, until a twist no one saw coming changed everything. Pamela Pitts was born on June 25, 1969, in the Forsyth Township, Michigan. Her father was in the military, and after she was born, he and his wife went on to have 3 more children. For a while, the family lived on a nearby Air Force base, before eventually settling in Prescott, a quiet town in Arizona. Pamela was friendly, outgoing, and had no trouble making new friends. One of her favorite things was her CB radio, a popular gadget amongst teens at the time. It allowed people to chat with friends or strangers, and every user had a nickname. Pamela went by Dark Angel. At 19, she moved out of her parents' place and got a house with her best friend and another roommate. Around that time, she also started dating a guy named Bobby. Pamela had big plans for the future. She wanted to go to college and start a career in the beauty industry. But before diving into that, she got a job as an accountant at a local restaurant. She clicked with the team right away and ended up loving it. On September 14, 1988, 19-year-old Pamela decided to visit her parents. That evening, they talked about plans for the upcoming weekend. She was planning to spend Saturday with them and bring some laundry over to wash. When Saturday rolled around, her parents waited all day, but Pamela never showed. She didn't come on Sunday either, not even a phone call. Still, they didn't panic just yet. They figured maybe her plans had changed and decided to wait a little longer. That same day, Pamela's roommate, Shelley, called her father, Paul, to ask if Pamela happened to be at their house. She said she hadn't seen her since the night before. Pamela had gone out and never come back. At first, Paul didn't think much of it. He figured Pamela might have stayed over at a friend's place. But the next day, he decided to call the restaurant where she worked just to check in. That's when he found out she hadn't shown up for her shift. She hadn't even called to let anyone know. That was completely out of character. Pamela never missed work and was always on time. Her father started to worry and eventually made the decision to contact the police. Detectives quickly got involved in the search and started by checking Pamela's house. Inside, they found all of her personal belongings, including her purse and driver's license, still in her room. Her car was also parked out front. At the same time, they spoke with Pamela's roommate, Shelley. She told them she hadn't seen Pamela since Friday night. According to her, Pamela had gone to a party in the woods on the edge of town with some friends and never came back. But there was one more strange detail. Pamela and Shelley shared a joint bank account they used to save up for rent. And shortly before she disappeared, Pamela had withdrawn all the money from that account without telling Shelley a word. The forest where Pamela had gone for the party had a bad reputation amongst locals. It was a popular hangout spot for teens and college kids who wanted to drink away from adult supervision. And from time to time, those parties turned violent. With serious consequences. Just a few years before Pamela disappeared, there was a fight in that same forest between 2 young men. One pulled a knife, killed the other, and ended up with a 10-year prison sentence. Police interviewed Pamela's friends, who had been with her at the party. They said she wandered off into the woods for a few minutes, but never came back. As strange as it was, they assumed she just decided to head home and didn't think much of it at the time. Detectives also spoke with her family, co-workers, and other acquaintances, but no one had any idea where Pamela could have gone. In the days that followed, police continued trying to track her down, but every lead went cold. That all changed on September 29th, 13 days after Pamela went missing. A couple of locals were walking through the woods. not far from the area where those parties were usually held, when something strange caught their eye. Sticking out from a pile of trash near a roadside dump was what looked like part of a body. As they got closer, they realized it was a badly burned human corpse lying among the garbage bags. They immediately ran to the nearest payphone and called the police. When officers arrived, they realized the body was so badly charred it couldn't be visually identified. There were no documents or personal belongings, just one thing that had survived the fire: a metal bracelet on the victim's wrist engraved with 2 words, Dark Angel. To confirm the identity, the medical examiner got dental records from a local clinic, and that's how they finally confirmed what everyone had feared. The body belonged to Pamela Pitts, the young woman who'd been missing for nearly 2 weeks. The medical examiner couldn't determine Pamela's exact cause of death because her body was too badly burned, but they did uncover one disturbing detail. It appeared she had been killed well before her body was set on fire. Police also began to suspect that more than one person was involved. The way the crime was carried out suggested multiple people had played a role. First, the victim was murdered. Then, her body was hidden for a period of time, probably weeks, before it was burned and dumped at the roadside landfill. With the case now officially classified as a homicide, police shifted their focus to finding out who was responsible. Their first suspect was Pamela's boyfriend, Bobby. During an interview with detectives, he said the last time he saw Pamela was the night she disappeared, at the party in the woods. According to Bobby, he had to leave early for his night shift, so he said goodbye and took off. He also mentioned that Pamela didn't have any other plans and was supposed to head home after the party. Detectives checked his alibi and confirmed that he really had been at work that night, so they crossed Bobby off the suspect list and kept digging for answers. Detectives then spoke with Pamela's 2 housemates, who confirmed she never came home that night. The police also decided to verify both of their alibis, and that's when things got a little interesting. The first roommate, Jeremy, had been at a football game, then spent the rest of the night out with friends, who backed up his story. As for Pamela's friend, Shelley, she said she'd finished work late that evening, then met up with her boyfriend, Raymond. The two went to hang out at a friend's place, and according to her, they got back to his house sometime after 3 a.m. Shelley claimed she couldn't fall asleep, so she got in her car and just drove around the city until 7 in the morning. That story raised some eyebrows. Detectives paid a visit to Raymond to confirm the timeline, but he told them they actually got home closer to 11:30 p.m., not 3 a.m. When they pointed out the inconsistency, Raymond said it had been over 2 weeks ago, and he just didn't remember the exact time. Still, detectives weren't ready to just take his word for it. They asked him to take a polygraph, and he agreed. The results showed no signs of deception in his answers. So, for now, investigators gave him the benefit of the doubt, assuming he might have genuinely misremembered. During those conversations, detectives got another potential lead from Shelley. She mentioned that shortly before Pamela disappeared, she had been having money troubles. She was struggling to cover her share of the rent, and had even talked about possibly moving back in with her parents. Combined with the fact that Pamela had drained their shared bank account just before vanishing, it made detectives wonder if there might be a financial motive behind her death. But soon, they got a far more disturbing lead. One of Pamela's friends came forward and told police about a man who had been bragging about killing her. This guy claimed to be a Satanist and said he had attacked Pamela with an ice pick, then performed some kind of sacrificial ritual. Police tracked the guy down, but he denied having anything to do with the murder. Detectives couldn't find a single piece of evidence linking the self-proclaimed Satanist to the crime, and they started to doubt he had any real connection to Pamela's death. The biggest red flag was the lack of any wounds on her body that matched an ice pick, and when you added in the whole ritual story, it sounded less like a confession and more like something he just made up. Not long after, police got another lead. A witness who'd been at the party told them about a girl named Melinda, someone who might have had a reason to go after Pamela. According to him, Melinda had a reputation for getting into fights and a temper that could go off at any moment. He said the two got into a heated argument that night, and it ended with Melinda beating Pamela up. Detectives brought Melinda in for questioning, but she denied everything. In fact, she said she hadn't even been at the party that night. Still, police weren't convinced. They reached out to the district attorney, who arranged for a formal sworn hearing. With several people who had attended the party once again, she insisted she wasn't there and claimed she had been at a local hotel with a small-town band, but no one could confirm her story. Multiple witnesses, on the other hand, said they were sure they'd seen her at the party. With mounting suspicions against Melinda, detectives finally had enough to charge her, and 4 months later she was arrested for perjury, but she didn't spend long behind bars. 10 months after her arrest, Melinda was released because police simply didn't have enough evidence to charge her with Pamela's murder. It's worth mentioning that as soon as she was freed, Melinda left the state and never returned to her hometown. From that point on, the case hit a dead end, and with no other solid leads, it eventually went cold. But everything changed a few years later, thanks to a discovery no one saw coming. On May 25, 1991, a group of students exploring an old abandoned mine near Prescott stumbled upon something horrifying at the bottom: a man's body. He had been wrapped inside the lining of a waterbed, and based on the level of decomposition, it looked like he'd been dead for several weeks. Medical examiners identified the man as Raymond Clerks, Shelley's boyfriend, the same Shelley who had lived with Pamela. The cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head. Detectives working Pamela's case immediately jumped into action. Was it just a coincidence, or could there be a connection? They looked into Raymond's last days and learned that, in the weeks leading up to his disappearance, his family had been trying to get in touch with him, but he wasn't answering his phone. Shelley told them he had left town on some business and hadn't returned yet. That explanation held until Raymond missed a close family member's wedding. That's when his relatives knew something was seriously wrong. After confirming his identity, detectives launched a full investigation into Raymond's murder, starting with the person closest to him, Shelley. When they questioned her, she claimed she had no idea where Raymond was and said she was just as worried as everyone else. But while they were speaking with her at the house, officers noticed something strange: what looked like dried bloodstains leading toward the garage. They followed the trail and entered the garage, where they saw Shelley's car. As soon as they got closer, they were hit by the overwhelming smell of decomposition coming from the vehicle. A closer look revealed that the entire trunk was stained with blood, and lab tests later confirmed it belonged to Raymond. Under the front seat, detectives also found a handgun. Forensic testing showed it was the exact caliber used to kill him. Police immediately arrested Shelley, though she continued to deny any involvement in Raymond's murder, but the evidence kept piling up. Investigators examined tire tracks near the abandoned mine where the body was found, and they matched perfectly with the tires on a pickup truck Shelley had borrowed from a close friend just days earlier. On top of that, a flashlight was recovered from the bottom of the mine, and Shelley's fingerprints were all over it. Despite the mounting evidence, Shelley refused to confess. For 2 years, she held her ground, while prosecutors built their case and prepared for trial. Then, just before things went to court, Shelley finally broke and agreed to tell detectives what really happened to Raymond. Shelley told detectives she and Raymond had been dating for several years. During that time, he'd been training to become a commercial pilot. After finally getting his license, Raymond decided he wanted to move to California to pursue a job, and taking Shelley with him wasn't exactly part of the plan. He told her he wanted to break up, and even said he was taking their dogs with him. According to Shelley, their final conversation happened while they were out of town. The two were lying on the roof of a car watching planes fly overhead, heartbroken over Raymond's decision to leave her behind in Arizona. Shelley said she pulled out a gun and shot him in the head, but even with her confession, detectives weren't convinced. All the evidence suggested Raymond had been killed at their home, not in some remote area. Forensic evidence pointed to him being shot inside the house, then kept in the trunk of Shelley's car for nearly 2 weeks. After that, she borrowed a friend's pickup truck, loaded his body into it, and dumped it in the abandoned mine. There was one more thing that didn't sit right with detectives. They didn't believe Shelley could have done all of this on her own. They suspected someone had helped her, but she refused to name anyone else, sticking to her version of the story. Still, in the end, Shelley was sentenced to 20 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Naturally, the detectives working Pamela's case started to seriously wonder if Shelley had something to do with her murder too. But she kept denying it, and there was still no solid evidence tying her to the crime. So, just like that, Pamela's case went cold once again. After Shelley's arrest, Raymond's father started supporting Pamela's family. He even offered a $10,000 reward for any information that could help solve her murder. Detectives also publicly promised full immunity to anyone who may have helped cover up the crime. They came forward and told the truth, but no one did. In the years that followed, investigators kept revisiting Pamela's case, hoping to find new clues, but every lead they chased ended in a dead end. That continued for 20 years until 2011, when Shelley was released from prison. She moved to a small town in Nevada, got a job as an accountant, and eventually got married. From then on, she lived a quiet, low-profile life. Neighbors described her as upbeat, kind, and friendly. But behind the scenes, investigators still believed she'd gotten away with murder, and they hadn't stopped looking for evidence. By that time, Pamela's case had been handed over to a new detective. He decided to go back to square one and review every piece of evidence from the beginning. And surprisingly, he uncovered several overlooked details that raised serious red flags about Shelley. Multiple people interviewed back then recalled that on the night Pamela vanished, Shelley had been driving around town looking for her. When friends asked what was going on, Shelley reportedly told them, straight up, that she was going to kill Pamela. Others claimed Shelley had bragged about knowing how to get away with murder, saying that the key was to make someone disappear for a few weeks, then either burn the body or dump it in a mine shaft. But as suspicious as it all sounded, it still wasn't enough to hold up in court. So, the detectives reached out to the prison where Shelley had served her sentence and requested every single recorded phone call she'd made during her time behind bars. Most correctional facilities in the U.S. record inmate phone calls, and it was one of those recordings that finally gave investigators what they'd been hoping for. In a call shortly after Shelley was questioned about Pamela's case, her father asked if she was worried about getting arrested once she got out. He made it clear he was referring to the night Pamela disappeared. Shelley paused for a moment, then admitted there was one big thing that could land her back in prison. But she didn't go into details. Even though it wasn't a smoking gun, it was enough for investigators to make a move. They brought the recording to the prosecutor, and after reviewing everything, he gave the green light. On June 4, 2017, Shelley, now 50 years old, was arrested once again. But this time it was for the murder of Pamela Pitts. With no clear-cut physical evidence linking Shelley to the crime, the prosecutors faced an uphill battle. Her defense team immediately filed a motion to block any mention of Raymond's murder, arguing that it had nothing to do with Pamela's death. Prosecutors, on the other hand, believed it was highly relevant, pointing out the disturbing similarities between the two cases. Both victims had lived with Shelley, both had disappeared under suspicious circumstances, and both had ended up dead. In the end, the judge ruled in favor of the defense, saying the jury couldn't be told that Shelley had once been convicted of killing her boyfriend. And without that key piece of context, the prosecution's case suddenly looked a whole lot weaker. There were other unexpected problems, too. Many of the key witnesses had either passed away or couldn't recall details clearly after all those years. To make matters worse, Shelley's attorneys pointed out that the medical examiner had never been able to determine Pamela's exact cause of death. They argued that it was possible she died from natural causes, or that some kind of accident had happened. In the end, it took 4 years just to prepare for trial, and eventually the prosecution made a highly controversial decision. They offered Shelley a plea deal. If she agreed to plead guilty to Pamela's murder, the time she'd already served for killing Raymond would count toward her sentence, and she'd be released from custody immediately, walking straight out of the courtroom a free woman. Pamela's parents didn't like that idea, but still agreed to the deal. After decades of waiting, they just wanted the truth. Chance a jury could find Shelley not guilty, and if that happened, the case might never be solved. So, in March 2021, Shelley took the deal and finally told investigators what happened that night. Pamela and Shelley had been best friends, living together in the same house. Both of them weren't, but even with their combined income, they were barely scraping by. So they invited a third roommate to help split the rent. But even that didn't fix things, and after a few months, Pamela told Shelley she was planning to move out and go back to live with her family because she just couldn't afford it anymore. That news hit Shelley hard. She didn't get along with her own parents and had no idea where she'd go in that case. And without Pamela, there was no way she could keep up with the rent. On the night of the murder, Shelley found out that Pamela had emptied their shared bank account, and she lost it. Furious, she jumped in her car and started driving around, looking for Pamela, thinking to herself that if she found her, she might just kill her. She eventually tracked Pamela down at a party in the woods. The two stepped away from the crowd to talk, and that's when Shelley snapped. She punched Pamela in the face, and when she fell to the ground, Shelley kept hitting her until she stopped breathing. Other people at the party were only a few dozen feet away, so Shelley had to act fast. She pretended they were just goofing around, laughing out loud and making fake conversation every time she heard footsteps nearby. Shelley claimed she just couldn't handle the feeling of betrayal from someone she considered her closest friend. That's how she saw Pamela's decision to leave and take all the money with her. The anger, the hurt, the sense of being abandoned. It all exploded in that one moment of blind rage. And she made a terrible mistake. According to her, it was the same kind of emotional spiral that led to Raymond's murder when he told her he was moving to California and taking their dogs with him. That's where her confession ended. Under the terms of the plea deal, she wasn't required to say anything beyond the act of the killing itself. But detectives still believe she didn't act alone. Someone, they suspected, had helped her move the body out of the woods, and later burn it. Right after her confession, Shelley was released from court and returned to Nevada, where she went back to working as an accountant and living with her husband. And just like that, the case of Pamela Pitts was officially closed. But detectives still couldn't shake the feeling that Shelley hadn't acted alone. They suspected someone helped her get rid of the body, possibly Melinda, the woman who'd clashed with Pamela that night. Still, without a confession, it was nearly impossible to prove. It also remained unclear whether Pamela had really emptied their shared account, or if she had just withdrawn her own share since she wasn't planning to stay. Given how much Shelley had twisted the details of Raymond's murder in her confession, detectives suspected she might not be telling the truth about Pamela either. Even though Pamela's parents agreed to the plea deal, the outcome left a bitter aftertaste. They admitted they would have preferred to see Shelley behind bars for the rest of her life, but understood that wasn't realistic. Her father later told reporters, "This woman has been convicted of murder twice. If I were her husband, I'd sleep with one eye open." A girl from a small town went out trick-or-treating on Halloween and vanished without a trace. The case immediately grabbed national attention, and over the next few days, more than 5,000 people joined the search. But despite the massive investigation, police couldn't solve the mystery. That is, until they stumbled onto a completely unexpected twist that finally revealed what happened. And the truth shocked everyone. Lisa Ann French was born on June 2, 1964, in Wisconsin. When she was young, her parents got divorced, and she moved with her mom to the small town of Fond du Lac. A few years later, her mom remarried, and Lisa became a big sister to a younger brother. By 1973, Lisa was 9 years old, a typical kid attending her local elementary school, active in the Girl Scouts, and spending most of her free time playing outside with friends. That October, Lisa was buzzing with excitement about Halloween, or more specifically, about collecting as much candy as possible from the neighbors. She'd originally planned to dress as a butterfly, but the late October weather turned chilly, forcing her mom to improvise. She pieced together a last-minute costume using clothes from around the house, including an oversized black hat, and sent Lisa out to trick-or-treat. Lisa had planned to go out trick-or-treating with a friend, but that evening she got grounded and had to stay home. So, Lisa set out alone, though her mom warned her not to stray too far from their house. Their neighborhood was considered safe, and Lisa's parents knew everyone within a several-block radius. Plus, other kids and parents were out that night, so her mom wasn't too worried. Lisa was also looking forward to a Halloween party thrown by neighborhood parents. That year, news reports had sparked panic across the country about candy tampering, stories of hidden razor blades, and even poison in treats. To ease fears, the community decided to host a controlled, safe environment for the kids. Lisa left home around 6 p.m., promising to return by 7. But when she didn't come back, her mom started to worry. At first, she figured Lisa had gotten carried away trying to collect as much candy as possible. But when the clock hit 8 p.m., she decided to go look for herself. She combed the nearby streets, but there was no sign of her daughter. Frantic, she asked everyone she passed if they'd seen Lisa. Word of the disappearance spread fast through the neighborhood, and soon some neighbors joined the search, but no one could find a trace of her. Eventually, her mom decided to call the police. Officers swarmed the area, and soon dozens of people were out searching, with the crowd growing by the hour. Investigators learned Lisa had only stopped at 2 houses that night, a classmate's and a teacher's. After that, she simply disappeared. This only deepened the fear. Both homes were just minutes from her own, meaning something could have happened almost immediately after she left. The search lasted all night, but turned up nothing. By morning, even more locals joined the effort, and police expanded the hunt citywide. Soon, national news picked up the story. For many, Halloween was supposed to be fun, a night of kids laughing and collecting candy, just like Lisa. Now, her disappearance felt like a collective nightmare, and thousands now wanted answers. The second day of searching turned up nothing, but police weren't ready to give up. They printed thousands of flyers with Lisa's photo, and volunteers plastered them across the town and beyond. Local gas stations even offered free gas to search volunteers, whose numbers eventually swelled to over 5,000 people. They combed every street, forest, field, and river, anywhere Lisa might be. Volunteers on horseback and ATVs scoured remote areas, but no one could find her. Days passed until a call came in on November 3rd, 3 days after Lisa vanished. A farmer driving through the small town of Taikita, just 3 miles from Lisa's home, spotted 2 trash bags by the roadside. Like everyone else, he'd heard about the missing girl, so he decided to check the bags, just in case. What he found horrified him. Inside one bag was Lisa's body. The other held her clothes. The farmer rushed to the nearest phone and called the police. News of the discovery spread like wildfire. By the time officers arrived, dozens of locals had gathered at the scene, all in shock over the grim find. Investigators confirmed the body was Lisa's and sent it to the medical examiner, who established she'd been sexually assaulted. Initially, they thought the cause of death was strangulation, but later determined she'd actually died from shock. Back in 1973, DNA testing wasn't a thing yet, so detectives had to rely on whatever physical evidence they could find. Forensics went through all of Lisa's clothes, picking up stray fibers that seemed out of place. They also found a single hair, but there wasn't a single fingerprint. Not on her clothes, not on her body, and not even on the trash bags the killer used to dump her remains. News of the brutal murder didn't just shake their small town. It spread across the whole country. People were outraged, demanding the police catch the killer as soon as possible. Parents were terrified and scared for their own kids' safety. Lisa's funeral took place 3 days after her body was found. Thousands of people showed up for the service, so many that the organizers had to set up multiple lines just to let everyone say their goodbyes. Meanwhile, the police were doing everything they could to track down the killer. With no solid leads, they focused on retracing Lisa's steps that night. 2 families told investigators she'd stopped by their houses for candy, and after that, she just vanished. That meant something had to have happened almost immediately after she left the second house. From their investigators considered 2 possibilities: either a stranger saw Lisa outside and lured her away, or she knocked on another door for candy, and someone who lived there attacked her. The first theory didn't seem likely. Lisa wasn't the kind of kid to go off with a stranger or to hop into a random car. And none of the neighbors reported hearing screams or seeing anything suspicious. That made the second theory seem much more likely. Investigators went door to door, questioning everyone on the street. There were dozens of houses, but every single resident claimed Lisa hadn't stopped by. With no immediate leads, detectives started looking closer at each household, trying to narrow down possible suspects. They ruled out houses where only women were present, and also eliminated the ones Lisa had already passed before visiting her teacher and classmate. They also knew Lisa had only been knocking on doors of families she knew well. She was familiar with most of her neighbors, but wasn't close with all of them. So, the police asked her mom who else on that street might Lisa have felt comfortable visiting. She gave them a few names, but one in particular stood out. A little further down the street lived a 24-year-old man named Gerald Turner. He shared a home with his girlfriend and their young daughter. There were several reasons why Turner caught the police's attention. First, Lisa knew him well. He and his family had previously lived in a duplex with Lisa's family right on the other side of the wall. Their families interacted all the time, and Lisa often ran over to play with his daughter. She also talked to Turner himself quite a bit. She would excitedly bring him new things her parents had bought for her, and he always seemed happy to listen. The second reason had to do with his behavior when police questioned everyone in the neighborhood. He didn't show any obvious signs of guilt, but something about his responses fell off. The detectives couldn't put their finger on it, but his answers just didn't sit right with them. The third reason came to light a little later. Investigators had a pretty clear timeline of when Lisa was attacked, just minutes after she left the last house. And during that exact window, Turner was home alone. His girlfriend and their kid were at a Halloween party, which meant he had the perfect opportunity to commit the crime before they got back. With all this information, Turner seemed like the most likely suspect out of everyone on that street, but proving his guilt was a whole different story. Police questioned him multiple times, but he kept denying any involvement. Eventually, they asked if he'd take a polygraph test, and Turner agreed. During the test, the examiner flagged some of his answers to key questions as inconclusive. Detectives tried to use that to pressure him into confessing, but he wouldn't budge. Later, they asked him to take another test. This time, he flat out refused. With no confession, investigators turned back to the limited physical evidence they had. As we know, forensic experts had found a few stray fibers on Lisa's body and clothing along with a single human hair. After analyzing it, they conducted the hair most likely wasn't from someone's head, it was from the killer's body, so police obtained a warrant to search Turner's house and collect hair samples from him in his bedroom. They immediately took note of the bedspread because it was the same color as the stray fibers found on Lisa's clothing. When forensic experts examined it more closely, they confirmed that the fibers could have come from this blanket, but proving it with absolute certainty just wasn't possible. The hair sample was another frustrating piece of evidence. In color, but without DNA testing, there was no way to prove a definitive match. Still, these findings only deepened their suspicions. Investigators kept pressing Turner, showing up at his house, bringing him in for questioning, but no matter how many times they confronted him, he stuck to his story. He swore he had nothing to do with Lisa's murder. This dragged on for months, and for Lisa's family, it was pure agony. Not only had they suffered an unimaginable loss, but they also had to live with the torment of not knowing who had taken her life. To make things even harder, Lisa's mother was in the early stages of pregnancy at the time of the murder. She was grieving her daughter while also trying to prepare for the arrival of another child. Since Turner continued to deny any involvement, detectives decided to speak with his girlfriend and ask for a more detailed account of that night. She told them that she and her daughter had gone to a Halloween party and returned home around 7:15 p.m. When she walked in, she saw Gerald lying on the couch in his bathrobe. Right away, he told her he wasn't feeling well and just needed to rest. As she sat in the living room, he kept getting up and going to the bedroom, lying down for a moment, then coming back out just as quickly each time. He told her not to disturb him and insisted he needed to rest. She found it a little odd, but assumed he really was sick. A short while later, she and her daughter left again to visit her mother. This only added to the police's suspicions about Turner, but they still had no solid proof. That was the case until August 8, 1974, when he was brought in for yet another interrogation. This time, 9 months after the murder, something changed. Turner suddenly decided to confess, and finally told detectives what really happened that night. According to Turner, Lisa had indeed come to his house for candy, and he invited her inside. At that moment, his girlfriend and daughter were still at the Halloween party. From the very first second, he had one thing in mind: assaulting Lisa. So he took her to the bedroom and committed the crime. Afterward, he realized Lisa wasn't showing any signs of life. He panicked, claiming he never meant to kill her. Turner tried to revive her, but right then, he heard his girlfriend and daughter pulling up outside. Thinking fast, he moved Lisa's body from the bed to the bathroom connected to the bedroom. Then, he went out to the living room and lay down on the couch. As soon as his girlfriend walked in, He told her he wasn't feeling well and asked her not to bother him. Turner then went to the bedroom, hoping she wouldn't follow him, but he couldn't sit still. He was terrified that at any moment, she'd walk in and see what he had done. That's why he kept going back to the living room every few minutes. He knew that if his girlfriend decided to use the bathroom, she'd immediately see Lisa's body, and he was doing everything he could to prevent that. Soon after, his girlfriend left to visit her mother, and Turner started figuring out how to get rid of Lisa's body. He pulled socks over his hands to avoid leaving fingerprints, grabbed 2 trash bags, and stuffed Lisa's body along with her belongings inside. He then carried everything out to his car and drove to a nearby town. There, he dumped the bags by the side of the road and headed back home. By the time Lisa's family and neighbors began searching for her, Turner had already covered his tracks. Turner's confession shocked not just Lisa's family and the town's residents, but even the investigators themselves. For 9 months, they couldn't charge him because the circumstantial evidence simply wasn't enough. But then, out of nowhere, he decided to confess in vivid detail. And most importantly, he gave the police information that no innocent person could have possibly known. After his confession, Turner was arrested and the prosecution began preparing for trial. It started just a few months later, but the prosecutor faced an unexpected problem. Right before the trial began, Turner recanted his confession. He claimed the police had written it themselves and that he had only signed it because he was exhausted from their constant pressure and harassment. Despite this, there was little doubt about his guilt. Even his ex-girlfriend, who had no idea what had happened at the time, apparently believed he was responsible and testified against him in court. The prosecution also pointed to the fibers found on Lisa's clothing. They matched the bedspread in Turner's bedroom, the very place where he'd taken Lisa. But the strongest piece of evidence was still his confession. It contained far too many specific details to be fabricated. In the end, Turner was found guilty and sentenced to 38.5 years in prison. But his story didn't end there. Despite the horrific nature of his crime, Turner was released early for good behavior. He walked free in 1992 after serving just 17 years behind bars. However, he wasn't released straight back into society. Instead, he was placed in a halfway house, a transitional facility where former inmates live under regular supervision as they adjust to life outside prison. These homes are designed to help with reintegration, offering structure, support, and strict rules to reduce the risk of reoffending. Still, Turner's release sparked massive outrage. Lisa's family was devastated, and the people of Milwaukee, where Turner was relocated, were furious. The idea of such a dangerous criminal living in their community was unacceptable, so residents demanded that authorities remove him immediately. Soon city and state officials joined the public outcry. While they didn't have the power to forcibly evict Turner, they began pressuring the correction systems to overturn the decision and get him out of Milwaukee. A year after Turner was released, the correction system finally decided to send him back to prison. Their investigation revealed that the parole board had made a mistake. Turner was never supposed to be eligible for early release in the first place. Around the same time, state officials began working on a new law to prevent dangerous criminals like Turner from ever being released again. The law proposed that individuals convicted of sexual assaults who posed a high risk of reoffending wouldn't be sent back into society after serving their time. Instead, they'd be transferred to secure medical facilities and held there until doctors determined they were no longer a threat to others. This law, named after Turner himself, was passed in 1994. Authorities hoped it would block any future attempts by Turner to gain his freedom. But just a few years later, they were hit with another setback. In 1998, Turner once again applied for early release. To everyone's disbelief, the parole board refused to classify him as a dangerous sexual offender, even despite damning testimony during the hearing from Turner's ex-wife and several former girlfriends. Each of them shared similar stories. They said Turner had repeatedly abused them when they refused his advances. But even with these overwhelming testimonies, the board still wasn't convinced. In the end, Turner didn't fall under his own law and was released once again. He moved back into a halfway house, and a few months later, he nearly attacked a parole officer with a knife during a routine check. But even after that, Turner was allowed to remain free. The following year, Turner filed a lawsuit against a waste management company that had refused to hire him. At the time, he was living in Wisconsin, where laws prohibited employers from denying someone a job based solely on their criminal record. Shockingly, the court ruled in Turner's favor, and he was awarded an undisclosed amount of money from the company. This continued until 2003. Turner was still living in a halfway house with law enforcement regularly checking in on him. During one of these routine visits, officers discovered a massive collection of disturbing adult photos and videos on Turner's computer. They also found out he had been watching 3 movies about serial killers. Under the terms of his parole, Turner was strictly prohibited from possessing or viewing any such materials. As a result, he was immediately arrested, and the judge decided to send him back to prison for 15 years. Lisa's family thought this would finally be the end, that Turner would spend the rest of his life behind bars. But once again, they faced another devastating twist. The parole board refused to extend his sentence, and Turner was scheduled for release in 2018. Lisa's mother refused to accept that Turner might walk free again. She launched a petition demanding to keep him behind bars. The petition quickly gathered thousands of signatures and drew nationwide attention from people who didn't want such a dangerous criminal back in society. Local and state authorities also backed the movement, and together they began working to overturn the decision regarding his release. This time, they once again invoked the law named after Turner, arguing that he should be transferred to a secure psychiatric facility instead of being set free. Naturally, Turner fought back, hiring lawyers to challenge the decision, and the legal battle dragged on for several years. Finally, in 2022, a judge made the final ruling. Turner did fall under the law that bore his name. The court determined that he posed a threat to others, and instead of being released, he was sent to a secure psychiatric facility. But even after this ruling, Turner's lawyers filed an appeal and are still fighting to overturn the decision to this day. As of now, Turner is 75 years old and remains a psychiatric facility. But despite his age, opponents of his release firmly believe he is still a threat and argue that he should never be allowed back into society under any circumstances. It's also worth noting that while Turner has refused to directly admit his guilt, he made several indirect but convincing confessions over the years. During his initial trial, right before sentencing, he walked past Lisa's mother and quietly said, "I didn't mean to do it." At one point during his time in prison, Turner even wrote a letter addressed to Lisa herself, apologizing and admitting that he had killed her. There was another moment when he let his guilt slip. Turner once said that if he hadn't committed the crime on Halloween, it wouldn't have gotten so much attention from the public and the media, and no one would have cared. Because of all this, Lisa's family knows their fight isn't over. They'll keep battling to make sure Turner never walks free again. And given his history, this latest attempt to get released probably won't be his last. A girl stepped outside the play near her home and vanished without a trace. Her disappearance sparked the biggest search operation in the country's history, but despite everyone's efforts, she was nowhere to be found. For days, there were no answers, but then investigators uncovered a series of disturbing clues that finally revealed the truth behind this dark and haunting case. April Jones was born on April 4, 2007, in a small British town called McCuntliffe. It was a quiet, peaceful place with a population of just over 2,000 people, located far from any big cities. April was the youngest in her family, with an older brother and sister. She loved spending time with friends, riding her favorite pink bike through the streets of her town, and swimming. In 2012, when she turned 5, April started primary school. She quickly stood out as a bright and determined student, and the teachers adored her. She was also a social butterfly, making friends with other kids almost instantly. On October 1, 2012, April went to her swimming lesson at a local sports center while her parents attended a school meeting. After that, she invited her friend over, and her parents drove them home. The girls watched a cartoon together, and around 7 p.m., April wanted to go outside for a walk. At first, her mom was hesitant because it was already getting dark, but April still found her way to convince her. She had done well in school the day before, so as a reward, her mom eventually decided to let her go. She just reminded the girls not to wander too far from home, and with that, April grabbed her bike and took off. About 20 minutes later, April's mom stepped outside to call her home, but she was nowhere to be seen. Panic set in immediately. She started searching the nearby streets, hoping to spot her daughter. The neighborhood was on the outskirts of town, a small residential area with several apartment buildings. She walked around, checking behind the buildings, but there was no sign of April. Finally, she spotted April's friend and rushed over to ask if she'd seen her, and the friend's answer sent chills down her spine. The girl told her that a car had pulled up next to them. April talked to the driver, got inside, and they just drove away. Hearing this, April's mom went into full panic mode and immediately called the police. Within minutes, officers arrived at their home and spoke with April's friend first. She described the vehicle as a gray van and said the driver was a man with dark hair and a beard, wearing a green jacket and sweatpants. She had gotten a good look at him because he actually stepped out of the van and helped April climb inside. Her mother later explained that April had cerebral palsy, which made it difficult for her to get into a vehicle on her own. April's friend also mentioned something that seemed a little off. She said April got into the van on the driver's side. Right away, police realized this likely meant the vehicle had a left-hand drive. That stood out because, in the UK, most cars have the steering wheel on the right side. April's friend had simply assumed she was getting into the driver's seat, but in reality, she was probably entering the van from the passenger's side. Realizing that April had most likely been abducted, police immediately called for backup and declared it a critical incident. A massive search operation kicked off and investigators sent out an alert with details on the suspect and his van. Word of April's disappearance spread like wildfire, first through the neighborhood and then beyond. Dozens of people gathered outside her home, eager to help with the search. But at that stage, the crowd actually made things more difficult for police, who needed to go door-to-door questioning every resident. Meanwhile, people started sharing the news online, drawing even more volunteers to the area. As the night went on, hundreds of people joined the search, combing the streets alongside law enforcement. The situation was so urgent that even the local waste collection service stopped working because every single worker left their job to help look for April. Before long, the case made national headlines, news outlets picked up the story, and the police issued a public appeal, asking anyone with information to come forward. They released April's photo and a description of the suspect, and soon, tips started flooding in. Unfortunately, despite the massive effort, the search turned up nothing. Within the first few hours, they had combed through the entire town, but there was no sign of April. The next step was to search the surrounding forests and fields, but that was easier said than done. By then, it was pitch black outside, and rain had started to fall. The terrain around the town was rough and hard to navigate, and officers knew they wouldn't be able to cover much ground overnight. Still, they refused to stop. The search continued until morning, and as the sun came up, even more volunteers joined in. Some had even traveled from other towns to help. Meanwhile, police expanded their efforts, putting up missing persons alerts on billboards outside the city, hoping for any kind of lead. With the news of the case spreading across the country, police were flooded with calls, but most of the tips didn't lead anywhere. Still, that morning, one name kept coming up, a name mentioned by multiple callers. It was a local resident, 46-year-old Mark Bridger. He quickly became a person of interest for several reasons. First, he matched the suspect's description. Second, he was one of the few people in town who drove a left-hand drive vehicle. But the biggest red flag was that someone had spotted Bridger's car near April's neighborhood, right around the time she vanished. When police started digging into Mark Bridger's background, they discovered a long rap sheet, though his crimes were mostly minor to moderate. He had been arrested multiple times for assaults, thefts, and various offenses like driving without a license. Detectives started tracking him down and found a few addresses where he could be staying. They sent officers to all of them at once, but Bridger and his car were nowhere to be found. Then, just minutes later, detectives caught a break. A police helicopter spotted him walking his dog not far from home. But what really stood out was his behavior. The helicopter had been circling for nearly half an hour, and he never looked up, not even once. A short while later, a police officer approached Bridger and asked him to identify himself. He gave his name and immediately added, "I know what this is about." The officer then asked the question everyone wanted an answer to, "Where is April?" Bridger responded, "It was an accident. I hit her with my car." Right after that, he was placed under arrest and taken to the station. During the drive, he kept talking, despite the fact that the officer didn't ask any additional questions. He claimed he had no idea where April was because he had blacked out. According to him, after accidentally hitting her with his car, she was unresponsive. He panicked, put her in his vehicle, and tried to give her first aid, but nothing worked. Then, he said everything just went blank for hours, and by the time he came to, April's body was gone. Bridger insisted that after realizing what had happened, he spent the entire night searching for her, wandering through the forests and fields. He also claimed that he only found out who April was that morning when he saw news reports about her disappearance on TV. Naturally, detectives weren't buying Bridger's story because there were too many inconsistencies. First, there was April's friend who had seen everything. She clearly remembered April talking to the driver and getting into the van with his help, fully conscious. But Bridger insisted he had hit her with his car and placed her inside while she was unconscious. So his version just didn't match the eyewitness account. Then there was the whole memory blackout claim. It sounded far-fetched on its own. But what made it even more suspicious was what police discovered next. Shortly after April disappeared, Bridger had shaved off his hair and beard. It looked like a clear attempt to alter his appearance and avoid being caught. Still, Bridger stuck to his story. When detectives pointed out the inconsistencies, he changed his tune slightly, now claiming he had been heavily drunk that day, which, in theory, could explain his supposed memory blackout. He also insisted that while he couldn't remember where he had put April's body, he was sure she was dead and in a safe place. No matter how hard investigators pressed him, they couldn't get the truth out of him, so they shifted their focus to his house. The moment they stepped inside, they were hit with the strong smell of cleaning products. The house was also uncomfortably hot. That's when they noticed the wood-burning stove in the living room. It had clearly been running for hours. Forensic teams collected the ashes and sent them for testing. But aside from that, there were no obvious clues. No sign of April. No belongings. Nothing. However, when forensics took a closer look, they found traces of blood, and the lab results later confirmed it was April's. Next, investigators turned their attention to Bridger's car. If his story was true, that he had accidentally hit April with his vehicle, there should have been some evidence to back it up. But there wasn't. There was no blood inside the car, no damage to the exterior, nothing that suggested an accident had even happened. Once again, his version of events didn't add up. Then came the results from the ashes in his fireplace. Forensic experts found 17 fragments of human bone, all belonging to April. Another bone fragment was also discovered in the bathroom drain. This confirmed the heartbreaking reality. April was no longer alive, but detectives didn't believe Bridger had managed to completely destroy her reality. Remains, it was far more likely that he had taken what was left and hidden it somewhere. So, despite the grim discovery, police pushed forward with their search, determined to find whatever was left. The news that April was most likely dead sent shockwaves through the community. Until that moment, people had held on to hope that she would be found alive. Now, the focus of the search had shifted. Hundreds of volunteers and police officers were no longer looking for a missing girl, but for her remains so her family could lay her to rest. By then, the search operation had grown into something massive. In fact, it would go down as the largest in the country's modern history. Alongside local volunteers, hundreds of professionals from various emergency services joined in. They searched through the most difficult terrains, rivers, forests, lakes, determined to find any trace of April. Meanwhile, detectives kept digging for evidence linking Bridger to the crime. When they examined his computer, they found something really disturbing. It was filled with illegal content involving minors. Even more sickening, he had saved photos of victims from other high-profile cases. On top of that, they found dozens of images of local children from their own town, including April and her older sister. It seemed like he had been downloading their pictures from social media. Then, investigators uncovered something even more unsettling. April's older sister revealed that just a few months before the abduction, Bridger had sent her a friend request on social media. She had mentioned it to their father, who immediately recognized the name. He had known Bridger back in the early 90s, but had lost touch with him over the years. The request struck him as odd. Why would Bridger, a grown man, want to connect with his teenage daughter? Trusting his instincts, he told her not to accept it. It's also worth mentioning that Bridger was a father himself. He had 6 children from 4 different women. Yet, at the time of April's disappearance, he lived alone. Police discovered a troubling pattern. Bridger frequently pursued relationships with women who had young children. Given the horrific evidence found on his computer, this detail took on a whole new level of significance, and only made detectives more convinced they were dealing with a predator. As police dug deeper into Bridger's background, they discovered that he never stuck to one job for long, constantly jumping between different fields of work. He also had a habit of making up stories about himself. To some people, he claimed he had served in the military and even had to change his identity for security reasons. But that was a complete lie. What made it even stranger was that he repeated this claim during police interrogations. He insisted that he had served his country, that he was a good person, and that he would never have done something like this on purpose. Between that and his strange claims about April's death, detectives started to realize they were probably dealing with a pathological liar. It didn't matter how many times his stories were proven false, he just kept sticking to them. They also learned something else supporting this theory. Bridger had told everyone he knew that his parents were dead. But in reality, they were very much alive. Another interesting detail was that Bridger had broken up with his girlfriend just days before April's abduction. People who knew him said he didn't take it well at all. He started drinking heavily, and it only sent him further downhill. As police continued combing through his computer, they found something even more disturbing. Just hours before April disappeared, Bridger had messaged 3 different women, asking to meet up, but all of them turned him down. After that, he opened and watched some illegal content from his sickening collection. At this point, his guilt seemed undeniable. But there was still one major problem. April's remains were nowhere to be found. Desperate for answers, detectives repeatedly turned to the public, hoping that someone had seen Bridger or his vehicle that night. Any small lead could help them retrace his steps and finally figure out what he had done with April's body. At some point, a witness came forward with an interesting lead. He reported seeing Bridger the morning after April's abduction around 9 a.m. The man was walking along the riverbank carrying a black bag. Investigators also discovered that shortly after that, Bridger had taken his car to a repair shop. The mechanics remembered him well because he had been acting strangely. By that time, everyone in town knew about April's disappearance and emotions were running high. But Bridger talked about the case as if he were a grieving parent. He was on the verge of tears, speaking as though the missing child was his own. His reaction stood out to the workers. It was overly emotional, almost theatrical, and something about it just didn't sit right. Following this new lead, search teams focused their efforts along the river, hoping to find any trace of April. But no matter how thoroughly they combed the area, they still found nothing. Realizing that April's body might never be recovered, detectives made a difficult decision. They charged Bridger with murder, relying on the overwhelming evidence they already had. With April's blood found inside Bridger's home, police pieced together what they believed had happened. Their theory was that Bridger lured April into his car under some pretense, then took her back to his house, committed SA, and killed her. After that, he started disposing of her body. Investigators learned that Bridger had previously worked at a slaughterhouse. They suspected he might have used those skills to get rid of the body before burning parts of her remains in his fireplace. But forensic experts agreed there was no way he had gotten rid of everything, which meant some of it had to be hidden somewhere else. With the case moving forward, Bridger was placed in jail to await trial, which was set to begin in a few months. Meanwhile, search teams weren't planning to give up. Even as the weather got worse and new leads dried up, they kept searching, still hoping to find April's remains. The prosecution was confident they could secure a conviction even without a body, but they still refused to give up the search. In total, search teams scoured 60 square kilometers or 37 square miles of land, covering every possible location where April's remains could have been hidden, but they found nothing. In the end, April's parents had no choice but to bury only the small fragments recovered from Bridger's home. To honor her memory, they also placed some of her belongings inside the coffin. Hundreds of people attended her funeral, many traveling from other towns, just to say goodbye. Over the course of the search, April had become like family to an entire community, and now they had to let her go. In January 2013, 3 months after April's murder, Bridger stood before the judge and pleaded not guilty to murder, but at the same time, he admitted that he was likely responsible for her death. During the trial, he stuck to his story, claiming that he had accidentally run over April with his car, despite overwhelming evidence proving otherwise. He also insisted that he still couldn't remember where he had hidden her remains. And yet, Bridger continued to paint himself as the good guy, saying he had only wanted to help April after the so-called accident. The trial lasted until late May, and in the end, the jury found him guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, which is a pretty rare sentence in the UK. After the trial, Bridger was transferred to a new prison, where he was attacked by another inmate. He stabbed him several times with a shank, but the injuries weren't fatal. For years after his conviction, detectives kept reaching out to Bridger, hoping he'd finally tell them where April's remains were. But he never wavered. He just kept insisting he remembered nothing. Then, out of nowhere, police got a tip from another inmate. According to him, Bridger had confessed, saying he had dumped April's remains in the river near his home. But investigators weren't convinced. If a bag containing human remains had been thrown into the water, it likely would have surfaced. And given that search teams had thoroughly scanned the river for miles, it seemed highly unlikely that Bridger was telling the truth. A year after his sentencing, the local government bought Bridger's house, and in November 2014, they decided to demolish it. Hundreds of locals, including April's parents, gathered to watch as the house was torn down, the very place where she had been taken from them. In 2018, April's family faced yet another heartbreaking ordeal. Her father fell seriously ill and suffered partial memory loss. When he regained consciousness, he started asking his wife why April hadn't come to visit him in the hospital. And so, she had to break the news to him all over again, telling him that their daughter was gone. In a cruel twist of fate, he was forced to relive the pain of losing April a second time. As for the search for her remains, it hasn't resumed since 2013. Police have stated that they are willing to restart the search if new information comes in. But so far, there has been no progress. It has now been over 12 years since April was taken, and detectives admit that the chances of ever finding her are slim to none.